waited her entire life for the return of the prince who once promised he'd come back. But what happens when loyalty turns into a lifetime of silence? This story explores the power of love, the weight of promises, and the heartbreaking passage of time. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The wind swept across the northern moorlands of England, with a bite that spoke of winter's approach. The year was 1347, and the kingdom found itself caught between seasons, much like the delicate balance of power that held the realm together. In the far reaches of the northern territories, where the land stretched wild and untamed, stood the fortress of Windermere, a stronghold carved from gray stone that had weathered countless storms and witnessed the rise and fall of many lords. Within the great hall of Windermere, Eleanor Ashford stood near the massive hearth, her slender fingers tracing the intricate embroidery on her woolen gown. The fabric was a deep emerald green, layered with a darker overdress of forest brown, trimmed with fox fur at the collar and cuffs. Her long chestnut hair fell in gentle waves down her back, partially braided with small leather strips woven through the plaits in the northern fashion. At 19 years of age, Eleanor possessed a beauty that was both delicate and resilient, her hazel eyes reflecting the intelligence and strength that had been cultivated through years of managing her father's household after her mother's passing. The great hall bustled with activity as servants prepared for the arrival of distinguished guests. Lord Edmund Ashford, Eleanor's father, had received word that Prince Adrian of the royal house would be passing through their lands on his return from negotiating peace treaties with the Scottish lords along the border. It was an unexpected honor, one that had sent the entire fortress into a flurry of preparation. Eleanor's younger sister Margaret rushed into the hall, her cheeks flushed with excitement. At 15, Margaret still possessed the unbridled enthusiasm of youth, her blue eyes sparkling with anticipation. She wore a gown of pale blue wool, simpler than Eleanor's but no less carefully crafted, with long sleeves that fell past her wrists and a leather belt cinched at her waist. "Eleanor, they've been spotted on the eastern road. The prince's company will arrive within the hour," Margaret exclaimed, gripping her sister's arm with barely contained excitement. Eleanor smiled at her sister's exuberance, though her own heart had begun to beat faster at the news. She had heard tales of Prince Adrian throughout her life, the second son of King Edward, renowned for his skill in combat and his dedication to the realm's protection. Unlike his older brother, Crown Prince Richard, who remained at court managing the kingdom's internal affairs, Adrian had chosen the path of a warrior, leading campaigns and forging alliances in the kingdom's most troubled regions. "Compose yourself, Margaret," Eleanor said gently, though not unkindly. "We must represent our house with dignity and grace. Father has worked too hard to build our family's reputation to have it undone by over-eager behavior." Margaret nodded, attempting to school her features into something more appropriate, though the effort made Eleanor want to laugh. Their father, Lord Edmund, approached them from across the hall. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his dark hair streaked with gray at the temples. He wore a tunic of deep burgundy wool over a shirt of fine linen, with a heavy leather belt from which hung his sword, a reminder that even in times of relative peace, a lord must always be prepared to defend his lands. A thick cloak of wolf fur draped across his shoulders, fastened with a bronze clasp bearing their family's sigil. "Eleanor, I trust everything is in order?" Lord Edmund's voice carried the weight of authority tempered by affection for his daughters. "Yes, father. The chambers have been prepared, and cook has ensured we'll have a feast worthy of royalty," Eleanor replied, her voice steady and confident. Lord Edmund nodded approvingly. "Good. The prince's visit, though brief, could prove advantageous for our family. Adrian is highly regarded by the king, and his favor could mean increased trade agreements and protection for our northern borders. I expect you both to be on your finest behavior." "Of course, father," both sisters replied in unison. The sound of horses and men in the courtyard drew everyone's attention. Eleanor's heart quickened as she straightened her posture, her hands smoothing down the front of her gown. Through the tall windows, she could see the column of riders entering through the main gates. The prince's banner flew high, the royal colors of crimson and gold snapping in the wind. Lord Edmund strode toward the entrance, his daughters following at a respectful distance. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and a gust of cold air swept into the hall, carrying with it the scent of horses, leather, and the outdoors. The first to enter were the prince's guards, men clad in leather armor reinforced with steel plates, their cloaks bearing the royal insignia. They moved with military precision, their eyes scanning the hall with practiced vigilance. Then he entered, and Eleanor felt her breath catch in her throat. Prince Adrian stood tall, easily 6 feet in height, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of combat training and physical exertion. He wore a tunic of deep charcoal gray beneath a leather jerkin studded with small metal rivets. Over this, a cloak of thick black wool lined with dark fur fell from his shoulders, held in place by a clasp of silver wrought in the shape of a lion, the royal symbol. His strong jaw was covered with a few days' growth of beard, and his dark brown hair fell just past his collar, slightly disheveled from the journey. But it was his eyes that captured Eleanor's attention, a striking shade of steel gray that seemed to take in everything at once, intelligent and assessing yet not without warmth. At 26 years of age, Prince Adrian carried himself with the confident bearing of a man who had proven his worth on battlefields and in council chambers alike. A sword hung at his hip, its pommel worn smooth from use, and his hands, though those of nobility, bore the calluses of a warrior who trained daily with his weapons. Lord Edmund stepped forward, bowing deeply. "Your Highness, Wintermere is honored by your presence. Please consider our home yours for as long as you grace us with your company." Adrian's stern features softened into a genuine smile as he clasped Lord Edmund's shoulder in greeting. "Lord Ashford, your reputation for hospitality precedes you. I apologize for the short notice of our arrival, but the northern roads have proven more welcoming than expected, and we made better time than anticipated." "No apology necessary, Your Highness. May I present my daughters, Lady Eleanor and Lady Margaret?" Eleanor and Margaret curtsied deeply, their movements graceful and practiced. When Eleanor rose, she found Prince Adrian's gray eyes upon her, and for a moment, the noise and bustle of the great hall seemed to fade. There was something in his gaze, an intensity that made her acutely aware of every detail, the way the firelight played across his features, the slight smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth, the way he seemed to truly see her, not just as the daughter of a northern lord, but as a person of substance. "Lady Eleanor, Lady Margaret, the pleasure is mine," Adrian said, his voice deep and resonant. "Your father speaks highly of you both in his correspondence with the court." "You honor us with your words, Your Highness," Eleanor replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the flutter in her chest. "We hope your journey was not too arduous. The northern roads have their challenges, but nothing that good men and strong horses cannot overcome," Adrian replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Though I must confess, the promise of a warm hearth and good company made the final miles pass more swiftly." Lord Edmund gestured toward the tables being set for the evening meal. "Please, Your Highness, you and your men must be weary. We have prepared chambers for you to refresh yourselves, and a feast will be ready within the hour." "Your generosity is most appreciated, Lord Ashford," Adrian said. Then his gaze returned to Eleanor. "Perhaps, Lady Eleanor, you might show me something of Wintermere's grounds before the meal. I've heard much of the northern fortresses, and I find myself curious about their construction and defensibility." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks but maintained her composure. "It would be my honor, Your Highness." As the guards and servants began the process of settling the prince's company, Eleanor found herself walking beside Adrian through the corridors of Wintermere, very much aware of the proper distance she maintained, yet feeling an unexpected connection to this man she had only just met. The stone corridors of Wintermere were dimly lit by torches set in iron sconces, their flickering light casting dancing shadows on the ancient walls. Eleanor led Prince Adrian through the passages, pointing out various features of the fortress, though she was acutely aware of his presence beside her. "Wintermere was built by my great-great-grandfather, Your Highness," Eleanor explained, her voice echoing softly in the stone hallway. "He chose this location for its strategic position overlooking the northern approach. The walls are 15 feet thick in places, and the foundation is built directly into the bedrock." Adrian listened attentively, his hands clasped behind his back as he walked. "Your ancestor was wise. I've seen many fortifications in my travels, but few that blend so seamlessly with the natural landscape. It's as if the fortress grew from the earth itself." They emerged onto a covered walkway that overlooked the inner courtyard. Below, servants moved about their duties while Adrian's men saw to their horses and equipment. The late afternoon sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Tell me, Lady Eleanor," Adrian said, turning to face her, "do you find life in the north isolating? Court life in the south is so different, filled with constant intrigue and social maneuvering." Eleanor considered the question carefully. "I confess, Your Highness, I have little experience with court life. My mother passed when I was 12, and since then, I have managed my father's household. The north may be isolated, but it has its own richness. There is honesty in the struggle to survive these harsh winters, a clarity of purpose that I imagine can be lost in the complexities of court." Adrian's expression grew thoughtful. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years, my lady. I have often felt that same sentiment myself. The battlefield, for all its horrors, possesses a terrible honesty. Every man reveals his true character when faced with mortality." "You have seen much combat, then?" Eleanor asked, immediately wondering if the question was too forward. But Adrian did not seem offended. Instead, a shadow passed across his features. "More than I would have wished, yes. The Scottish borders have been restless these past years, and there are always those who would test the kingdom's strength. But such is the burden of those born to serve the realm." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Eleanor spoke again. "My father says that you are different from most nobles, that you choose to be among your men rather than commanding from a distance." Adrian smiled, and Eleanor noticed how the expression transformed his face, softening the hard lines carved by battle and responsibility. "Your father is kind to say so. In truth, I cannot ask men to risk their lives following orders from someone who does not understand the weight of what they carry. A leader must be willing to endure what he asks of others." "That is a rare quality, Your Highness," Eleanor said softly. Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her fully. The setting sun behind him cast his features in silhouette, but Eleanor could still see the intensity in his gray eyes. "Please, when we are not in formal company, I would prefer if you called me Adrian. Titles and formality have their place, but they create distance, and I find myself not wanting distance between us." Eleanor's heart raced at his words, at the implications they carried. "That would be highly improper, Your Highness." "Perhaps," Adrian acknowledged. "But we are alone, and I suspect you are not one to be constrained entirely by convention. Am I wrong?" A smile tugged at Eleanor's lips despite her attempt to maintain proper decorum. "You presume much based on a brief acquaintance." "Do I?" Adrian challenged gently. "I see a woman who has shouldered responsibilities that would break many twice her age, who speaks her mind with intelligence and care, who manages a household and earns the respect of those around her. That is not someone who simply follows the expected path without question." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. No one had ever spoken to her in such a way, seeing past the role of dutiful daughter to the person beneath. "You see clearly for someone who has only just arrived. I have learned to read people quickly," Adrian said. "It's a necessary skill when your life may depend on knowing who to trust. And I find that I want to know you, Eleanor Ashford, not just the Lady of Windermere, but the woman who stands before me now." The sound of a bell ringing from the great hall interrupted the moment. Eleanor stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they had been standing. "That will be the call to the evening meal. We should return." Adrian nodded, though something in his expression suggested disappointment at the interruption. "Of course. Shall we?" He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Eleanor accepted it. They walked back through the corridors, and Eleanor found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact, the strength of his arm beneath her fingers, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him, the subtle scent of leather and pine that clung to his clothing. The great hall had been transformed in their absence. Long tables were laden with food, candles and torches provided warm light, and the hearth blazed with a fire that pushed back the evening chill. Lord Edmund sat at the head of the high table, with places of honor arranged for Prince Adrian and his senior officers. Eleanor and Margaret were seated nearby, positions that would allow for conversation while maintaining appropriate propriety. As the meal progressed, Eleanor found herself drawn into the flow of conversation. Adrian proved to be an engaging speaker, sharing stories of his travels and observations about the various regions of the kingdom. He spoke of the differences between the northern and southern territories, of the unique challenges each faced, and of his vision for a more unified realm. "The kingdom's strength lies not in forcing uniformity," Adrian was saying, his gray eyes animated with passion for his subject, but in understanding and respecting the distinct character of each region. The North's resilience, the South's agricultural wealth, The Eastern port's trade connections. Each contributes something vital to the whole. Lord Edmund nodded approvingly. It's a perspective that serves you well, Your Highness. Too many at court view the North as little more than a barrier against Scottish incursions. Then they are fools, Adrian stated bluntly, drawing surprised looks from some of the assembled nobles. The North has produced some of the finest warriors and most capable administrators in the kingdom. To dismiss such resources is to weaken ourselves needlessly. Eleanor watched Adrian as he spoke, noting the conviction in his voice, the way he commanded attention without demanding it, the respect he showed even to those of lower rank. Throughout the evening she caught him glancing in her direction, their eyes meeting across the table in moments that felt charged with unspoken meaning. As the meal drew to a close and musicians began to play, Adrian rose from his seat and approached Eleanor. He bowed formally, extending his hand. "Lady Eleanor, would you honor me with a dance?" Eleanor felt every eye in the hall turn toward them, including her father's watchful gaze and Margaret's excited expression. She placed her hand in Adrian's, allowing him to lead her to the cleared space where others had already begun to dance. The music was a traditional northern melody, slower and more stately than the lively court dances of the South. Adrian's hand rested lightly on her waist, proper yet somehow intimate, while his other hand held hers with a gentleness that belied his warrior's strength. "You dance well?" Eleanor observed as they moved together in time with the music. "I had little choice but to learn," Adrian replied with a wry smile. "My mother insisted that a prince must be as comfortable in a ballroom as on a battlefield, though I confess I've always found the ballroom the more dangerous of the two." Eleanor laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her with its ease. "How so?" "On the battlefield, one's enemies are clear and intentions obvious. In a ballroom, one must navigate layers of meaning, unspoken rules, and hidden agendas. Give me an honest sword fight any day." "And yet here you are, dancing quite capably," Eleanor teased gently. Adrian's expression grew more serious, though warmth remained in his eyes. "The company makes all the difference. I find that when dancing with someone I genuinely wish to know better, the politics and posturing fade away, leaving only the moment." They continued to dance, and Eleanor felt as though they existed in their own world, separate from the watching eyes and the weight of expectation. She had never experienced anything like this, the sense of connection with someone she had only just met, as though they had known each other far longer than a handful of hours. When the music ended, Adrian escorted Eleanor back to her seat, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you, my lady. This has been the most pleasant evening I've spent in many months." "The pleasure was mine, Your Highness," Eleanor replied, aware that her cheeks were flushed and her heart still racing. As the evening wound down and guests began to retire to their chambers, Eleanor found herself replaying every moment, every word, every glance that had passed between them. She knew she should be cautious, that princes did not form lasting attachments with daughters of northern lords, that this was likely nothing more than pleasant diversion for Adrian during his journey. Yet something in the way he had looked at her, spoken to her, held her during their dance, suggested that perhaps, just perhaps, he felt the same unexpected connection that she did. That night, as Eleanor lay in her bed with the wind howling outside her window, she found sleep elusive. Her mind was filled with images of steel-gray eyes and a smile that had made her heart skip, of strong hands that could wield a sword yet held hers with such gentleness, of a voice that spoke of duty and honor but also of understanding and genuine interest in who she was beneath the titles and expectations. She did not yet know that this one evening would change the course of her entire life, setting in motion events that would test her strength, her patience, and her capacity to hope against hope. She did not know that the connection she felt was real, powerful, and mutual, or that it would become both her greatest joy and her deepest sorrow. All she knew in that moment was that Prince Adrian had awakened something within her, a longing for something more than the life she had always known, and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility that perhaps such dreams were not as impossible as she had always believed. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Eleanor awoke, her mind immediately returning to the events of the previous evening. She rose from her bed and moved to the window, looking out over the courtyard where frost still clung to the cobblestones. Below she could see members of Prince Adrian's company already moving about, their breath visible in the cold morning air as they tended to their horses and equipment. Eleanor dressed carefully, choosing a gown of deep plum wool with an overdress of charcoal gray, the sleeves lined with soft rabbit fur. Her maid, Anne, helped arrange her hair in an intricate braid that wound around her head like a crown before falling down her back. As Anne worked, Eleanor found her thoughts drifting repeatedly to the prince, to the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, to the strength of his hand holding hers during their dance. "You're quiet this morning, my lady," Anne observed, securing the final pins in Eleanor's hair. "Though I suppose that's to be expected after such an exciting evening." Eleanor met her maid's knowing gaze in the polished metal mirror. Anne had been with the Ashford family since Eleanor was a child, and the older woman possessed an uncanny ability to read her mistress's moods. It was a pleasant evening. Nothing more. "Of course, my lady," Anne replied, though her tone suggested she believed nothing of the sort. "Though I couldn't help but notice how the prince seemed quite taken with you. The whole hall was talking about how he barely looked away from you the entire meal." "People will talk regardless of the truth," Eleanor said, though she couldn't suppress the small smile that tugged at her lips. Prince Adrian was merely being courteous to his host's daughter. Anne made a sound that might have been agreement or skepticism. "If you say so, my lady, though I've seen many nobles show courtesy, and it rarely looks quite like what I witnessed last night." Before Eleanor could respond, a knock sounded at her chamber door. Margaret burst in without waiting for permission, her eyes bright with excitement and barely suppressed energy. She wore a gown of pale yellow wool, simpler than Eleanor's, but no less carefully crafted. "Eleanor, Father requests your presence in the solar. Prince Adrian wishes to speak with him, and Father wants you there as well," Margaret announced, practically bouncing on her toes. Eleanor's heart quickened, though she kept her expression calm. "Did Father say what the prince wishes to discuss?" "No, but he seemed pleased rather than concerned, so it cannot be anything troubling," Margaret replied. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Do you think he might ask for permission to court you?" "Margaret," Eleanor chastised, though the same thought had flickered through her own mind. "Don't be absurd. The prince has been here less than a day. Such decisions are not made so hastily, especially not by royalty." "But you like him," Margaret pressed. "I could see it in the way you looked at him. And he likes you too. Anyone with eyes could see that." Eleanor moved toward the door, unwilling to continue this line of conversation where it might lead to hope she could not afford to entertain. "Come, we shouldn't keep Father waiting." The solar was a smaller, more intimate chamber than the Great Hall, used for private family gatherings and important discussions. Tall windows let in the pale morning light, and a fire burned in the hearth to ward off the chill. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes hung on the walls, their rich colors muted by age and smoke. Lord Edmund stood near the fire, his posture relaxed but his expression thoughtful. Prince Adrian stood with him, dressed in a tunic of deep forest green beneath a leather vest, his dark hair still slightly damp as though he had recently washed. When Eleanor entered, his face lit with a smile that sent warmth cascading through her chest. "Ah, Eleanor, thank you for joining us," Lord Edmund said, gesturing for his daughter to approach. "His Highness has made a request that I believe you should hear directly from him." Adrian stepped forward, his gray eyes fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every detail of the moment. "Lady Eleanor, I hope I am not being too forward, but I would very much like to extend my stay at Wintermere for a few additional days. My men could use the rest before we continue our journey south, and I find myself reluctant to leave your father's excellent hospitality so soon." Eleanor's heart soared, even as her mind counseled caution. She looked to her father, who nodded slightly, giving her permission to speak. "We would be honored to host you for as long as you wish to stay, Your Highness. Wintermere's resources are at your disposal." "Thank you, my lady," Adrian said, and something in his tone suggested he was thanking her for more than just the extension of hospitality. "I was hoping you might consent to show me more of your lands. I am eager to understand the northern territories better, and I can think of no better guide than someone who knows them intimately." Lord Edmund cleared his throat. "Of course, such expeditions would require proper accompaniment. Margaret, you will join your sister, and I will assign several of our household guards to ensure your safety." "Naturally," Adrian agreed smoothly. "I would not dream of compromising Lady Eleanor's reputation. Several of my own men will accompany us as well." And so it was arranged. Within the hour, a party was assembled in the courtyard. Eleanor and Margaret wore heavy cloaks lined with fur, and Eleanor had changed into riding clothes more suitable for the outdoors. Adrian sat astride a magnificent black stallion, controlling the powerful animal with practiced ease. His men, 6 seasoned warriors, sat their own horses with the casual competence of soldiers who had spent years in the saddle. 4 of Wintermere's household guards completed the party, along with a servant carrying provisions should they be gone longer than expected. As they rode out through the gates of Wintermere, Eleanor felt a sense of freedom she rarely experienced. The responsibilities of managing her father's household weighed heavily on her most days. But here, riding across the moorlands with the wind in her hair and the autumn sun on her face, she could simply be Eleanor, not Lady Ashford with all the duties and expectations that title carried. Adrian guided his horse alongside hers, maintaining a proper distance but close enough for conversation. "I must confess, Lady Eleanor, my desire to see your lands was not entirely about understanding the northern territories." Eleanor glanced at him, her pulse quickening. "Oh? Then what was your true motivation, Your Highness?" "I wanted time to speak with you away from the formality of the hall, to know the woman behind the gracious hostess," Adrian said frankly. "Last night, I felt a connection that I cannot easily explain, and I find myself wanting to explore whether that feeling has foundation or was merely the product of good wine and pleasant company." His honesty was disarming, and Eleanor found herself responding in kind. "I felt it too," she admitted quietly, "though I hardly dared acknowledge it even to myself. You are a prince, and I am merely the daughter of a northern lord. Such connections, even if real, rarely lead anywhere that does not end in heartbreak." Adrian's jaw tightened, and something fierce flashed in his eyes. "I am tired of living according to what is expected rather than what is true. My entire life has been dictated by duty and obligation. For once, I want to follow something that feels genuine, something that speaks to who I am rather than what I am supposed to be." They rode in silence for a moment, the horses' hooves crunching through the frost-covered grass. Margaret had tactfully fallen back to ride with the guards, giving her sister space while maintaining propriety through her presence. "Tell me about yourself," Adrian said, his tone shifting to something lighter. "Not the dutiful daughter who manages her father's household, but Eleanor. What brings you joy? What do you dream about when you allow yourself to dream?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. No one had ever asked her such a thing before. "I love the early mornings," she began slowly, "before the household wakes, when I can walk the battlements and watch the sun rise over the moors. There is something profound in that moment, in the transition from darkness to light, the sense that each day brings new possibilities." "And your dreams?" Adrian pressed gently. Eleanor laughed softly. "My dreams are probably quite ordinary. I dream of a life that matters, of making a difference beyond the walls of Wintermere. I dream of love, true love, not the arranged marriages that are the fate of most noble daughters, but a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection." She paused, then added with a hint of self-deprecation, "I dream of adventure, though that is perhaps the most foolish dream of all, for a woman in my position." "I don't think it's foolish at all," Adrian said seriously. "In fact, I think those are the dreams of someone who understands that life should be more than mere existence, more than simply fulfilling the role assigned to us by birth." "And what of your dreams, Your Highness?" Eleanor asked, turning the question back on him. Adrian gazed out over the landscape, his expression distant. "I dream of a kingdom at peace, where the common folk can live without fear of war or famine. I dream of being more than just the second son, valued for my sword arm, but never quite trusted with anything of real importance. I dream of finding someone who sees me, Adrian, not Prince Adrian, someone who understands the weight I carry and doesn't simply see it as privilege to be envied." The raw honesty in his words touched something deep within Eleanor. Here was a man who carried the burden of royalty, but yearned for the simple human connections that his position made so difficult to achieve. They rode for hours, exploring the lands around Wintermere. Eleanor showed Adrian the places she loved, the high ridge that offered views for miles in every direction, the ancient oak tree that had stood for centuries and was said to have witnessed the signing of an important treaty, the stream that ran clear and cold even in the depths of winter. As they rode, they talked about everything and nothing, about serious matters of state and silly observations about the world around them. At one point, Adrian's horse stumbled slightly on loose stone, and he dismounted to check the animal's hooves. Eleanor dismounted as well, and they stood together in a small copse of trees. the guards maintaining a discreet distance that allowed for private conversation while still preserving propriety. "Eleanor," Adrian said, and the use of her given name without her title sent a thrill through her. "I know we have known each other barely more than a day, but I cannot deny what I feel. You have awakened something in me that I thought long dead, buried under years of duty and disappointed hopes." Eleanor's breath caught as Adrian stepped closer, though he made no move to touch her, respecting the boundaries of propriety, even as his words crossed into territory that was anything but safe. "I feel it too," Eleanor whispered, "but I am afraid. Afraid of hoping for something that cannot be, afraid of what happens when you leave, and I am left with only memories of what might have been." "Then let us make the most of the time we have," Adrian said intensely. "Let us be honest with each other. Let us explore this connection without promises we cannot keep or commitments that may be impossible to honor. Let us simply be Adrian and Eleanor, two people who found something unexpected and precious, and see where it leads." "And when you must leave?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. "When I must leave, I will not forget you," Adrian promised. "And if there is any way, any possibility of building something more lasting, I swear to you I will find it." Before Eleanor could respond, Margaret called out that they should begin heading back if they wanted to reach Wintermere before dark. The moment broke, but something had shifted between them. An understanding reached, a commitment made even if its ultimate fulfillment remained uncertain. The ride back to Wintermere was quieter, both Eleanor and Adrian lost in their own thoughts. When they entered the courtyard as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Eleanor felt as though she was returning as a different person than the one who had left that morning. That evening, another feast was held, though this one was smaller and more intimate. Adrian sat beside Eleanor, their conversation flowing easily, punctuated by shared laughter and meaningful glances. Lord Edmund watched them with an expression that mixed approval with concern, clearly recognizing the growing attachment between his daughter and the prince, but uncertain what it might mean for Eleanor's future. After the meal, Adrian asked Eleanor to walk with him in the covered gallery that overlooked the inner courtyard. Margaret accompanied them as chaperone, though she walked far enough behind to give them the illusion of privacy. "I have been thinking," Adrian said as they walked slowly through the torchlit corridor, "about what happens when I leave Wintermere. My duties require that I return to court within the fortnight, and I cannot delay indefinitely without drawing questions I am not yet prepared to answer." Eleanor's heart sank, though she had known this moment would come. "I understand. You have responsibilities that cannot be set aside for the sake of a connection formed over a few days. But that does not mean this must end," Adrian continued, stopping to face her. "With your father's permission, I would like to correspond with you. Letters, admittedly, are poor substitutes for true companionship, but they would allow us to continue to know each other, to explore whether what we feel now can survive separation and time." Hope bloomed in Eleanor's chest. "You would truly wish to continue this, even knowing the complications it might create?" "I would," Adrian said firmly. "Eleanor, I have spent years surrounded by people who want something from me, who see only the prince and the advantages my favor might bring. With you I feel seen as a man, valued for who I am rather than what I represent. That is not something I am willing to abandon without at least trying to see where it might lead." "Then yes," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "I would very much like to exchange letters with you, though I warn you I am no poet, and my observations of life in Wintermere may seem dull compared to the excitements of court." Adrian smiled, reaching out to gently take her hand, a gesture that was perhaps too familiar but that Eleanor did not resist. "I think you would be surprised by how appealing the peaceful rhythms of Wintermere sound to someone who has spent too long amid the chaos and intrigue of court life." They stood there, hands clasped, eyes locked, the space between them charged with all the things they wanted to say but could not, all the possibilities that hung tantalizingly out of reach. The next 3 days passed in a blur of carefully chaperoned rides, long conversations, and stolen moments of private connection. Each day, Eleanor felt the bond between them growing stronger, the easy comfort of two people who simply fit together, despite all the reasons they should not. Adrian was thoughtful and attentive, interested in her opinions on everything from the management of agricultural lands to the education of young nobles. He shared with her his frustrations with court politics, his concerns about growing tensions along various borders, his hopes for reforms that might improve the lives of common people. But beneath every conversation, every shared laugh, every meaningful glance, lay the knowledge that time was running out. On the morning of the 5th day, Adrian informed Lord Edmund that he must depart the following dawn. His duties could not be postponed any longer without causing diplomatic complications. That final evening, the atmosphere in the great hall was subdued despite the feast that had been prepared. Eleanor wore her finest gown, a creation of deep sapphire blue with silver embroidery along the sleeves and neckline, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that had taken Anne over an hour to complete. She wanted Adrian to remember her at her best, to carry an image that might sustain him through whatever came next. Adrian, too, had dressed with particular care, wearing a tunic of midnight blue beneath a leather jerkin tooled with intricate patterns, a heavy silver chain bearing the royal seal around his neck. When he saw Eleanor, his eyes lit with admiration that made her feel more beautiful than any amount of fine clothing ever could. After the meal, as musicians played and others danced, Adrian drew Eleanor aside to a quiet corner of the hall, Margaret trailing behind them as always. "Eleanor, there is something I need to say before I leave tomorrow," Adrian began, his voice low and intense. "These past days with you have been the most meaningful I have experienced in longer than I can remember. You have given me hope that there might be more to life than endless duty and obligation, that genuine connection is still possible even for someone in my position." "Adrian," Eleanor whispered, using his given name as he had invited her to do in private, "you have given me that same gift. You have shown me that my dreams of love and partnership and purpose need not be merely fantasies to comfort myself in quiet moments." Adrian took both her hands in his, a breach of propriety that neither of them cared about in that moment. "I must return to court, but I swear to you, this is not the end. I will write to you as often as I am able, and I will find a way to return to Wintermere. I do not know how long it might take, or what obstacles we may face, but I promise you, Eleanor Ashford, I will come back to you." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "And I will wait for you," she promised. "However long it takes, I will wait." They stood there, hands clasped, the rest of the hall fading away until there was only the two of them and the impossible promise they were making to each other. Margaret, watching from a few feet away, wiped at her own eyes, moved by the depth of emotion she witnessed. That night, Eleanor barely slept, knowing that morning would bring Adrian's departure. When dawn finally came, she dressed quickly and made her way to the courtyard where Adrian's company was preparing to leave. The sky was overcast, threatening rain, and a cold wind swept across the stones. Adrian was already mounted, his men formed up and ready to ride. When he saw Eleanor, he dismounted and approached her, Lord Edmund and Margaret standing a respectful distance behind. "Lady Eleanor," Adrian said formally, though his eyes conveyed all the informality his words could not. "Thank you for your gracious hospitality. These days at Wintermere will remain among my most treasured memories." "The honor was ours, Your Highness," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "May your journey be safe and your arrival welcomed." Adrian reached into his tunic and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. "I would like you to have this as a token of my esteem and a promise of my return." Eleanor unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small silver brooch in the shape of a rose, beautifully crafted with delicate petals that caught the pale morning light. It was clearly valuable, but more than that, it was personal, something that had belonged to Adrian himself. "I cannot accept something so fine," Eleanor protested, though her fingers closed around the brooch. "Please," Adrian said softly, "keep it safe for me until I return to claim it, and you." Before Eleanor could respond, before propriety could be completely abandoned, Adrian bowed, mounted his horse, and gave the signal to depart. Eleanor stood in the courtyard, the silver brooch clutched in her hand, watching as the man who had captured her heart in 5 impossible days rode out through the gates and disappeared down the road. Lord Edmund placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder. "He will return, Eleanor. I saw the way he looked at you. Whatever complications may arise, that young man will move heaven and earth to find his way back to you." Eleanor could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had promised to wait, and wait she would, no matter how long it took. What she did not know, what she could not foresee as she stood in that courtyard, with the cold wind tugging at her cloak, was just how long that wait would truly be, and how much it would cost them both. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after Adrian's departure. Eleanor was in the solar, reviewing household accounts with her father's steward, when a messenger bearing the royal seal was announced. Her heart leapt as she recognized the significance, and she barely managed to maintain her composure as she accepted the sealed parchment. Lord Edmund dismissed the steward and watched with paternal concern as Eleanor broke the wax seal with trembling fingers. The letter was written in Adrian's own hand, the script bold and clear, each word carefully chosen. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, and she felt warmth spread through her chest at the intimate salutation. "I hope this letter finds you well, and that Wintermere remains as beautiful as I remember it. The journey back to court was uneventful, though every mile took me further from where I wished to be. I find myself thinking constantly of our conversations, of your laughter, of the way the morning light caught in your hair as we rode across the moors. Court life feels hollow after the genuine connection we shared, but I remind myself that this separation is temporary. I am working to arrange my affairs in such a way that I might return to the north within a few months. Until then, please know that you are constantly in my thoughts. Yours, Adrian." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, memorizing each word, each phrase that spoke of his continued affection and his intention to return. She penned her own response that very evening, writing by candlelight in her chamber, choosing her words with care as she described the daily rhythms of life at Wintermere, the changing of the seasons, and her own feelings about their separation. Thus began a correspondence that would sustain Eleanor through the weeks and months that followed. Letters arrived with varying frequency, sometimes 2 in a week, sometimes none for a fortnight, depending on the reliability of messengers and the demands on Adrian's time. Each letter Eleanor received became a treasured possession, kept in a locked box in her chamber, read and reread until the parchment grew soft with handling. Winter descended upon Wintermere with particular ferocity that year. Snow piled high against the fortress walls, and ice made the roads nearly impassable. Eleanor spent her days managing the household, ensuring that stores would last through the harsh season, settling disputes among the servants, and overseeing the care of those who fell ill in the cold. But her evenings were devoted to Adrian's letters and her responses to them. Through their correspondence, Eleanor came to know Adrian in ways that their brief time together had not allowed. He wrote of his childhood, of the pressure of growing up as the second son, always in his brother's shadow yet expected to excel in every endeavor. He described the loneliness of his position, surrounded by people yet truly known by almost none. He shared his dreams for the kingdom, his frustration with corrupt nobles who exploited their positions, his desire to implement reforms that would improve the lives of common people. Eleanor, in turn, opened her heart in ways she never had before. She wrote of her mother's death and the weight of responsibility that had fallen on her young shoulders. She described her love for the northern lands, her pride in her people's resilience, her own dreams of a life that might combine duty with genuine happiness. She shared her fears and hopes, her observations about the world, her thoughts on everything from philosophy to agriculture. As winter gave way to early spring, Eleanor found herself living for the arrival of each new letter. Adrian's words had become as necessary to her as food or water, sustaining her through the long, dark months. He spoke often of his plans to return, though the timing remained frustratingly vague. Court business kept delaying his departure, he explained, matters that required his presence and could not be delegated. In one letter, written in early March, Adrian's tone shifted to something more serious. "My dearest Eleanor, I must confess that complications have arisen that may delay my return longer than I hoped. My brother, Crown Prince Richard, has taken ill. Nothing life-threatening but serious enough that my father, the king, has asked me to assume some of Richard's duties while he recovers. I cannot refuse such a direct request, without causing a rift that would ultimately harm my ability to return to you at all. Please understand that every day I remain at court is a day I wish I were instead riding toward Wintermere. Your patience and understanding mean more to me than I can adequately express. All my love, Adrian." Eleanor read the letter with a sinking heart. She understood the political realities, understood that Adrian could not simply abandon his responsibilities, but the disappointment was sharp nonetheless. She wrote back expressing her understanding and support, assuring him that she would wait as long as necessary, but privately she felt the first stirrings of doubt. How long could such a connection survive on letters alone? How long before the demands of Adrian's position made their relationship impossible to maintain? Spring brought new life to Wintermere. The snow melted, revealing the green shoots of early growth. The roads became passable again, and Lord Edmund's attention turned to the planting season and the management of his lands. Margaret, now 16, had attracted the attention of several young nobles from neighboring estates, and Lord Edmund began receiving requests for her hand in marriage. Watching her younger sister navigate the courtship process with excitement and hope, Eleanor felt a pang of longing. Margaret's suitors were present, tangible, able to court her properly with visits and formal declarations. Eleanor's own relationship, if it could even be called that, existed entirely in written words on parchment, promises that felt increasingly fragile with each passing week. In late April, a letter arrived that sent Eleanor's spirits soaring. Adrian wrote that Crown Prince Richard had recovered, and that he had been granted permission to make an inspection tour of the Northern Territories in early summer. "I will be at Wintermere by the first week of June," he wrote. "After all these months of separation, I can finally keep my promise to return to you. My heart counts the days until I can see your face again, hear your voice, and tell you in person all the things that letters cannot adequately convey." Eleanor threw herself into preparations with an energy that surprised even her father. She wanted everything to be perfect for Adrian's return, wanted to show him that Wintermere in summer was as beautiful as it had been in autumn, that her feelings had not diminished during their separation, but had instead grown stronger and deeper. The first week of June arrived, and Eleanor found herself waking each morning with anticipation, watching the road for signs of Adrian's approach. But the week passed with no sign of the prince or his company. Eleanor told herself not to worry, that travel delays were common, that a week's variance meant nothing when dealing with the uncertainties of medieval roads and the demands on a prince's time. The second week of June passed, then the third. Each day, Eleanor's hope warred with growing anxiety. She sent inquiries through her father's network of contacts, trying to discover what had delayed Adrian's journey. The responses were vague and contradictory. Some said the prince was still at court, others that he had left weeks ago but had been delayed by trouble along the borders. It was not until early July that a letter finally arrived, but it was not from Adrian. Instead, it bore the seal of the royal court and was written in an unfamiliar hand. Eleanor's fingers shook as she broke the seal. "Lady Eleanor Ashford," the letter began formally, "it is my duty to inform you that Prince Adrian has been called to lead a military campaign against incursions along the Scottish border. The situation has deteriorated rapidly, and His Majesty the King deemed the prince's immediate deployment essential to the kingdom's security. Prince Adrian asked that I convey to you his deepest regrets at being unable to fulfill his promise to visit Wintermere as planned. He assures you that he will write as soon as circumstances permit. In service to the Crown, Lord Chancellor William Hargrove." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, each reading doing nothing to lessen the cold weight that settled in her stomach. Adrian had not written himself. He had not even managed to send a personal message. Only this formal notification through a court official. She understood intellectually that a military emergency would leave little time for personal correspondence, but emotionally, the impersonal nature of the communication felt like a blow. Weeks passed with no further word. Eleanor continued her duties at Wintermere, but the joy had gone out of them. She moved through each day mechanically, performing her responsibilities with efficiency, but without the spark that had once characterized her work. Margaret worried about her sister, seeing how the light had dimmed in Eleanor's eyes, but she did not know how to help. Lord Edmund watched his daughter with growing concern. One evening in late July, he called Eleanor to his private study. He sat her down and looked at her with the kind of paternal seriousness that brooked no evasion. "Eleanor, I have made inquiries about Prince Adrian's situation," Lord Edmund began carefully. "The military campaign is real and serious. The Scottish lords have been testing our borders, and the prince has indeed been leading the response. But I have also learned something else, something I think you need to know." Eleanor's heart clenched. "What is it, father?" "There is talk at court of arranging a marriage for the prince. Crown Prince Richard has yet to produce an heir, and the king is concerned about the succession. There are pressures on Adrian to make a politically advantageous match, one that would strengthen alliances and secure the kingdom's future." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "I see," she managed to say, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Eleanor," Lord Edmund said gently, taking his daughter's hand, "I do not tell you this to cause you pain, but because I love you too much to let you cling to false hope. Prince Adrian may have genuine feelings for you. I do not doubt that he does, but the reality of his position may make it impossible for him to act on those feelings. He promised he would return," Eleanor whispered. "He promised." "I know, my dear, and I believe he meant it when he said it. But promises made in good faith can still be broken by circumstances beyond our control." Eleanor nodded, unable to trust her voice. That night, alone in her chamber, she finally allowed herself to cry, mourning not just Adrian's absence, but the death of the hope she had nurtured through the long winter and spring. August brought oppressive heat to Wintermere, unusual for the northern territories. Eleanor went about her duties in a haze, her emotions locked away behind a carefully maintained facade of competence. She stopped checking daily for letters from Adrian, though each time a messenger arrived, her heart still leapt with involuntary hope before she suppressed the feeling. It was in mid-August that a letter finally arrived, bearing Adrian's seal and written in his hand. Eleanor took it to her chamber before opening it, needing privacy for whatever it might contain. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, and she could hear the anguish in the written words. "I cannot adequately express my regret at being unable to keep my promise to return to you. The situation along the border has been far more complex than anyone anticipated, and my duties have kept me constantly engaged in either active combat or negotiations with the Scottish lords. But that is not the worst of what I must tell you. My father, the king, has informed me that I am to be betrothed to Lady Isabella of Westmont, a union intended to strengthen our alliance with the Western Territories. The betrothal will be announced at the autumn court, and the marriage is to take place next spring. Eleanor, I have fought against this with every argument I possess, but my father is adamant. He says that my personal desires cannot be allowed to supersede the kingdom's needs. I am trapped between duty and heart, and I do not know how to reconcile the two. Please know that my feelings for you have not changed, that you remain the keeper of my heart, even if circumstances deny me the right to offer you my hand. I will continue to search for a way out of this situation, but I needed you to hear the truth from me before rumors reached you through other channels. Yours always, Adrian." Eleanor read the letter through tears that blurred the words on the page. Part of her had expected this, had known in her heart that their story could not have a simple, happy ending, but the confirmation still felt like a sword through her chest. Adrian loved her but could not be with her. He was trapped by duty, and so, by extension, was she. She wanted to be angry, wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all. But she found she could not. She understood duty too well, had lived her own life in service to responsibilities that superseded personal desire. How could she blame Adrian for being bound by the same constraints that shaped her own existence? Eleanor wrote back, and it took her 3 days to compose the letter. 3 days of writing and discarding draft after draft until she found words that expressed both her understanding and her pain. "My dear Adrian," she wrote, "I received your letter and I confess it took me some time to find the strength to respond. I understand the position you are in, and I do not blame you for choosing duty over personal happiness. It is what we were both raised to do, what our positions demand of us. But I would be lying if I said I was not heartbroken. These months of waiting, of hoping, of building dreams that I now must relinquish, they have cost me more than I knew I had to give. I release you from any promises you made to me. You must do what your kingdom requires, and I must find a way to build a life from the pieces of the dreams I must abandon. I will always treasure the time we had together and the connection we shared. Please do not write to me again. It will be easier for both of us if we make a clean break, if we allow ourselves to move forward rather than clinging to something that can never be. I wish you every happiness in your marriage and in your life. With all the love I dare not speak of, Eleanor." She sent the letter before she could change her mind, before she could give in to the temptation to beg him to find a way, to choose her over duty, to run away from their responsibilities and build a life together somewhere far from courts and kingdoms and the weight of expectation. The days after sending that letter were the darkest Eleanor had ever experienced. She moved through her duties like a ghost, present in body, but absent in spirit. Margaret tried to comfort her, but Eleanor could not bear to discuss what had happened. Lord Edmund gave his daughter space, understanding that some griefs must be weathered alone. September came, and with it the announcement of Prince Adrian's betrothal to Lady Isabella of Westmont. The news spread throughout the kingdom, celebrated as a political triumph that would strengthen the realm. Eleanor heard the news from merchants passing through Windermere, and she felt numb, beyond pain, beyond feeling anything at all. Lord Edmund, watching his daughter waste away with grief, made a decision. He began accepting the suitors who had been courting Margaret's hand, but he also began considering offers for Eleanor. If his eldest daughter would not seek happiness for herself, perhaps he could at least secure her a comfortable future with a kind husband who would treat her well. "Eleanor," Lord Edmund said one evening in late September, "Lord Philip Westbrook has made an offer for your hand. He is a good man, widowed last year, with estates to the east. He has met you twice at regional gatherings, and has expressed admiration for your intelligence and capability. I am inclined to accept his offer unless you have strong objections." Eleanor looked at her father with eyes that had lost their spark. "Do as you think best, father. One marriage is much like another, I suppose." Lord Edmund's heart ached at his daughter's resignation, but he did not know how to restore the light that had been extinguished in her. He sent word to Lord Westbrook that the offer was accepted, and arrangements began for a spring wedding. Winter came again to Windermere, and Eleanor watched the first snow fall with a detachment that worried everyone who cared for her. She had agreed to marry Lord Westbrook, a man she barely knew and felt nothing for, because it seemed easier than fighting against the current of expectations and duty that pulled her along. But on a cold December night, as Eleanor sat alone in her chamber looking at the silver rose brooch Adrian had given her so long ago, a messenger arrived bearing a letter with Adrian's seal. She had thought their correspondence finished, had believed his betrothal meant an end to all contact, but here was a letter in his familiar hand. With shaking fingers, Eleanor broke the seal and began to read, not knowing that the words on that parchment would change everything once more, would reignite the hope she had tried so hard to extinguish, and would set in motion events that would test the very limits of her capacity to wait, to hope, and to believe in promises made under an autumn sky that now seemed like a lifetime ago. "My beloved Eleanor," the letter began, "I know you asked me not to write, but I cannot honor that request because I have news that changes everything. My betrothal to Lady Isabella has been broken. She has fallen in love with another man, a lord from her own territories, and has confessed this to both our families. Rather than force a loveless marriage, our fathers have agreed to dissolve the arrangement. Eleanor, I am free. The military campaign has ended successfully, and I have negotiated a lasting peace with the Scottish lords. I am coming to Windermere, and this time nothing will prevent my arrival. I will be there by the winter solstice. Please, I am begging you, wait for me just a little longer. Do not give up on us when we are so close to finally being together. All my love, all my hope, Adrian." Eleanor read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Adrian was free. He was coming. But she was now betrothed to Lord Westbrook, and the wedding was set for spring. She had created her own trap in her despair, and now she did not know how to escape it without bringing dishonor to her family and shame to a man who had done nothing wrong. She had less than 2 weeks to decide what to do, to choose between the safe, honorable path she had agreed to walk with Lord Westbrook, or the uncertain, dangerous hope that Adrian represented. The winter solstice was fast approaching, and with it, the moment when all the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart would either stand firm or come crashing down entirely. Eleanor sat frozen in her chamber, Adrian's letter clutched in trembling hands, her mind racing through the impossible situation she now faced. The candles had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls, and outside her window, snow continued to fall in thick, silent curtains. She had mere days before Adrian would arrive, and she was promised to another man. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like a physical burden. On one side lay duty, honor, and the commitment she had made to Lord Westbrook. He was a kind man by all accounts, respectable and well-regarded. Breaking their betrothal would bring shame upon her family and humiliation to a man who had done nothing to deserve such treatment. On the other side lay her heart, her dreams, and the man she loved with an intensity that had not diminished despite months of separation and heartbreak. Eleanor rose and began to pace her chamber, her woolen nightgown swishing around her ankles, her bare feet cold against the stone floor. She moved to her writing desk and withdrew the locked box containing all of Adrian's letters. She spread them across the desk's surface, rereading passages at random, remembering the hope and joy that had sustained her through the dark winter months. A knock at her door startled her. "Eleanor?" Margaret's voice came softly through the wood. "I saw light under your door. May I come in?" Eleanor quickly gathered the letters, but there was no hiding them entirely. "Enter." Margaret slipped into the room, her own nightgown covered by a heavy robe lined with fur. She took in the scene, the scattered letters, her sister's tear-stained face and haunted eyes, and understanding dawned across her features. "He wrote to you," Margaret said quietly, closing the door behind her. "Prince Adrian." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Margaret moved to her sister's side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What did he say?" "He is free," Eleanor whispered. "His betrothal was dissolved. He is coming here, Margaret, within days. He still wants me, still loves me, and Her voice broke. "I am promised to Lord Westbrook." Margaret pulled Eleanor into an embrace, holding her sister as sobs finally broke through the careful control Eleanor had maintained for so long. They stood like that for several minutes before Margaret guided Eleanor to sit on the edge of the bed. "Eleanor, listen to me," Margaret said firmly, kneeling before her sister and taking both her hands. "I have watched you these past months, watched you fade like a flower deprived of sunlight. You have been dying inside, and everyone who loves you has seen it. This betrothal to Lord Westbrook, it was never about love or even about your future happiness. It was about Father trying to give you some purpose, some direction, because he could not bear to watch you suffer any longer. But I gave my word," Eleanor protested. "Father gave his word. We cannot simply break such a commitment without consequences." "Then there will be consequences," Margaret said with unexpected fierceness. "But Eleanor, some things are worth the cost. I have watched you with Prince Adrian, seen the way you came alive in his presence, the way you spoke of him in those early months when letters still brought you joy. That kind of connection is rare, perhaps once in a lifetime. Can you truly tell me that you are willing to sacrifice it for a marriage of convenience to a man you do not love?" Eleanor looked at her younger sister with new eyes, seeing a wisdom that went beyond Margaret's 16 years. "When did you become so wise?" Margaret smiled sadly. "I learned from watching you. You have always been the strong one, the responsible one, the one who puts duty before everything else. But Eleanor, what good is duty if it destroys the person fulfilling it? You taught me to be strong, to be capable, to manage a household and think of others before myself. But you also taught me, though perhaps not intentionally, that there must be limits to sacrifice, that we cannot give everything away until there is nothing left of who we are." "Father will be disappointed," Eleanor said, though even as she spoke the words, she felt something shifting inside her, a loosening of the tight control she had maintained for so long. "Father loves you," Margaret countered. "When he sees that you are choosing life over slow death, he will understand. He may be angry at first, he may worry about the political complications, but ultimately, he wants you to be happy. I have heard him say as much to his steward when he thought no one was listening." Eleanor stood and walked to her window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. The moon had broken through the clouds, casting silver light across the white expanse. Somewhere out there, Adrian was riding toward her, believing that she was waiting for him, that their story might finally have the ending they both desperately wanted. "I do not know if I have the courage to do this," Eleanor admitted quietly. Margaret joined her at the window. "You are the bravest person I know, Eleanor. You have managed this entire household since you were 12 years old. You have faced down merchants trying to cheat us, settled disputes that might have turned violent, nursed the sick through a terrible winter fever 3 years ago. You have done all of that with grace and strength. Surely you have the courage to fight for your own happiness." Eleanor turned to her sister, fresh tears streaming down her face. But these were different from the tears of despair she had shed earlier. These were tears of decision, of commitment, of choosing to hope despite all the reasons such hope might be foolish. "Help me," Eleanor said simply. "Help me find the words to tell Father, to explain to Lord Westbrook, to make them understand." Margaret squeezed her sister's hands. "You do not have to face this alone. We will do it together." The next morning, Eleanor requested a private audience with her father. Lord Edmund received her in his study, the same room where he had first told her of the pressures on Prince Adrian to make a politically advantageous marriage. He looked up from the documents he had been reviewing as Eleanor entered, and immediately his expression shifted to concern at the tension visible in his daughter's bearing. "Eleanor, what troubles you?" Eleanor took a deep breath, drawing on reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. "Father, I need to speak with you about my betrothal to Lord Westbrook." Lord Edmund set down his quill, giving his daughter his full attention. "Go on." "I cannot marry him," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I know that I agreed to the match, that you have already accepted his offer and made commitments on our family's behalf. I know that breaking this betrothal will cause complications and perhaps bring some measure of shame upon our house. But Father, I cannot go through with it." Lord Edmund studied his daughter's face for a long moment before speaking. "This is about Prince Adrian." It was not a question, but Eleanor nodded anyway. "He wrote to me. His betrothal to Lady Isabella has been dissolved. He is free, and he is coming to Wintermere. He will arrive by the winter solstice. And you love him," Lord Edmund said quietly. "With all my heart," Eleanor confirmed. "I tried to let him go, tried to accept that our connection was impossible, tried to build a life without him. That is why I agreed to marry Lord Westbrook, why I thought I could settle for a comfortable, respectable marriage to a good man I do not love. But Father, these past months have shown me that such a half-life is not living at all. I have been merely existing, going through the motions of my duties while the essential part of myself withered away." Lord Edmund rose from his chair and moved to stand before the window, his back to Eleanor as he gazed out at the winter landscape. For several long moments he said nothing, and Eleanor's heart hammered with anxiety as she waited for his response. "Your mother and I," Lord Edmund began slowly, still looking out the window, "we were fortunate enough to marry for love. It was not a common arrangement, even then. My father had other matches in mind for me, alliances that would have brought greater political advantage. But I saw your mother at a spring festival, and from that moment, I knew that no amount of political benefit would be worth a lifetime spent with anyone else." He turned to face Eleanor, and she was surprised to see moisture in his eyes. "I have watched you suffer these past months, watched you accept a fate that I knew would make you miserable, and I hated myself for not intervening. But I told myself that you were making a practical choice, that you understood the realities of our world better than I gave you credit for. I told myself that I was respecting your decision as an adult woman capable of choosing her own path." "Father, Eleanor began, but Lord Edmund held up a hand. "Let me finish. The truth is, I was a coward. I was afraid of the complications that would arise if you chose to pursue a relationship with Prince Adrian. A prince and the daughter of a northern lord, it is not an impossible match, but it is far from simple. There would be those at court who would oppose such a union, who would question whether you were suitable, whether our family's status was sufficient. I did not want to see you hurt by such scrutiny, so I convinced myself that accepting Lord Westbrook's offer was the safer path." Lord Edmund crossed to Eleanor and took both her hands in his. "But I was wrong. Safety is not the same as happiness, and security purchased at the cost of your heart is no security at all. If you love Prince Adrian, if he loves you in return, then we will find a way to make it work. I will deal with Lord Westbrook, and I will face whatever political complications arise. You are my daughter, and your happiness matters more to me than any alliance or any fear of court gossip." Eleanor threw her arms around her father, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. "Thank you, Father. Thank you for understanding." Lord Edmund held his daughter close, stroking her hair as he had when she was a child. "Your mother would have made this decision weeks ago. She always was braver than I am." The task of informing Lord Westbrook fell to Lord Edmund, who sent a carefully worded letter explaining that circumstances had changed and that the betrothal must be dissolved. He offered compensation for any embarrassment or inconvenience caused and expressed his sincere regret at the situation. The response that came back several days later was gracious, if somewhat stiff. Lord Westbrook acknowledged the dissolution of their arrangement and wished the Ashford family well, though the undercurrent of wounded pride was evident in his formal phrasing. As the winter solstice approached, Wintermere was transformed by a flurry of preparation even more intense than what had preceded Adrian's first visit. Eleanor threw herself into the work, but this time, joy rather than mere duty animated her efforts. She chose her finest gown, a creation of deep crimson wool embroidered with gold thread in patterns of intertwining roses and vines. The sleeves were long and fitted, lined with golden silk, and the neckline was trimmed with soft ermine fur. Over this, she would wear a cloak of midnight blue lined with more ermine, fastened with the silver rose brooch Adrian had given her. Margaret helped her sister prepare, the two of them spending hours ensuring every detail was perfect. Anne, Eleanor's loyal maid, fussed over Eleanor's hair, creating an elaborate arrangement of braids woven with ribbons of gold and crimson that complemented her gown. On the morning of the winter solstice, Eleanor woke before dawn, too excited and nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully, Margaret assisting her with the complex layers of her outfit. When she was finally ready, she looked at herself in the polished metal mirror and barely recognized the woman who looked back. Gone was the hollow-eyed, grief-stricken figure of recent months. In her place stood a woman radiant with hope and determination, her hazel eyes bright with anticipation, her cheeks flushed with color that had nothing to do with the cold. "You look beautiful," Margaret breathed. "Prince Adrian will not be able to take his eyes off you." Eleanor smiled, touching the silver rose brooch at her shoulder. "I feel as though I have been sleeping and am only now waking up." They made their way down to the great hall where Lord Edmund waited. He looked at his eldest daughter and smiled with a mixture of pride and paternal affection. "You look every inch a princess," he said, "though I suppose that may soon be more than a mere observation." "Father, do not get ahead of yourself," Eleanor chided, though her heart soared at the possibility his words implied. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Eleanor tried to occupy herself with various tasks, but she found her attention constantly drawn to the windows, watching the road for signs of approaching riders. By midday, snow had begun to fall again, thick flakes that reduced visibility and made Eleanor anxious about travel conditions. "He will come," Margaret assured her sister. "Even if he has to walk through a blizzard, he will come." As afternoon faded toward evening and still there was no sign of Adrian's company, Eleanor felt anxiety beginning to gnaw at her newfound hope. What if something had happened? What if he had been delayed again? Or worse, what if he had changed his mind? Lord Edmund, seeing his daughter's growing distress, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "The roads are treacherous in this weather, Eleanor. It may simply take him longer than expected. Do not assume the worst." As darkness fell and torches were lit throughout Wintermere, Eleanor stood at one of the great hall's windows, staring out into the snowy night. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, feeling the chill seep through to her skin, and whispered a prayer that Adrian would arrive safely. It was Margaret who heard them first, the sound of horses in the courtyard penetrating the thick stone walls. "Eleanor, someone has arrived." Eleanor's heart leapt into her throat as she rushed toward the entrance, Lord Edmund and Margaret close behind. The heavy doors were pulled open, and a gust of cold air and snow swept into the hall. Through the swirling white, Eleanor could make out figures dismounting from horses, their cloaks covered in snow, their faces obscured by the darkness and the weather. Then one figure separated from the others, striding toward the entrance with a purposeful gait that Eleanor would have recognized anywhere. Prince Adrian stepped into the light of the hall, and their eyes met across the space. He was covered in snow, his dark hair wet and plastered to his head, his face red from the cold, but his gray eyes blazed with an intensity that took Eleanor's breath away. For a moment, propriety and protocol held them both in place. Then Adrian crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, and Eleanor met him halfway. He grasped both her hands in his, heedless of the watching servants and guards, heedless of everything except the woman standing before him. "Eleanor," he breathed, her name a prayer and a promise all at once. "I am here. I am finally here, and I swear to you nothing will take me away from you again." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy so profound she thought her heart might burst. "I waited," she said. "I waited for you." Adrian raised one hand to cup her face, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "I know the pain I caused you with my delays and my broken promises. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am asking for it anyway. These months away from you have been torment. Every day I thought of you, dreamed of you, longed for the moment when I could finally hold you in my arms and tell you that I love you, that I have loved you since that first evening when you showed me the battlements and spoke to me not as a prince, but as a man." "Adrian," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I love you. I have loved you through every moment of separation, through every doubt and every fear. I love you, and I choose you, above duty, above safety, above everything else." Lord Edmund cleared his throat gently, reminding them that they had an audience. Adrian reluctantly released Eleanor's hands and turned to face her father. bowing formally despite the informality of the moment that had just passed. "Lord Edmund, I apologize for the lateness of our arrival. The weather slowed our progress considerably, but I am grateful to finally be here, and I come with a request that I hope you will consider favorably." Lord Edmund smiled, the expression warm and knowing. "Your Highness, I believe I can guess the nature of your request. Perhaps we should retire to somewhere more private to discuss the details." "Actually, my lord, if you will permit me, I would prefer to speak here before all assembled, so that there can be no doubt or ambiguity about my intentions." Adrian turned back to Eleanor, and in front of the entire household, in front of servants and guards and his own men who had traveled with him through the snow, he dropped to one knee. Eleanor gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she realized what was happening. "Lady Eleanor Ashford," Adrian said, his voice clear and strong despite the emotion evident in his expression, "you are the finest woman I have ever known. You are intelligent, capable, kind, and brave. You have shown me what it means to truly see another person, to value them for who they are rather than what they can offer. These months apart have only confirmed what I knew from the beginning, that you are the only woman I want by my side, the only woman who could make me truly happy, the only woman I could ever imagine sharing my life with. Eleanor, I am asking you, before all these witnesses, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The hall had gone absolutely silent. Every eye was fixed on Eleanor and Adrian, waiting for her response. Eleanor looked down at the man kneeling before her, this prince who had chosen her over political convenience, who had fought his way back to her despite every obstacle, who was offering her not just his hand but his heart, his future, his everything. "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice starting soft but growing stronger with each word. "Yes, Adrian, I will marry you. I will stand by your side, share your burdens, celebrate your joys, and love you with everything I am for all the days of my life." Adrian rose to his feet and pulled Eleanor into his arms, holding her close as applause and cheers erupted throughout the hall. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in her scent, feeling the solid reality of her in his embrace after so many months of longing. "I have something for you," Adrian murmured against her ear. He reached into his tunic and withdrew a small velvet pouch. Opening it, he revealed a ring of white gold, set with a deep red ruby surrounded by small diamonds that caught the torchlight and sparkled like stars. "This was my grandmother's ring," Adrian explained as he took Eleanor's left hand. "She gave it to me before she died and made me promise to give it only to a woman I loved with my whole heart, a woman who would be my true partner in all things. Eleanor, this ring is yours, as I am yours, now and forever." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and Eleanor watched through tears as the beautiful piece of jewelry settled into place, feeling the weight of it, the significance of what it represented. This was real. Adrian was here, and they were betrothed, truly and publicly, with no shadows or doubts to cloud their future. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration. A feast was hastily prepared, and toasts were made to the newly betrothed couple. Adrian's men mingled with Wintermere's household, and the great hall rang with laughter and music. But through it all, Eleanor and Adrian barely took their eyes off each other, their hands finding each other's across the table, their smiles reflecting the profound joy and relief of finally being together with nothing standing between them and their future. The days following Adrian's arrival at Wintermere were among the happiest Eleanor had ever known. The fortress, which had felt so cold and empty during the months of separation, now seemed to glow with warmth and life. Adrian extended his stay indefinitely, sending messages to court explaining that he was securing the northern territories and strengthening important alliances, which was true enough, even if it was not the whole truth. Eleanor and Adrian spent every possible moment together, always properly chaperoned by Margaret or members of the household, but finding ways to create intimacy even within the bounds of propriety. They walked the battlements together in the crisp winter air, their breath forming clouds as they talked about their hopes for the future. They sat by the fire in the great hall, playing chess and sharing stories of their childhoods. They rode across the snow-covered moors, Adrian's powerful black stallion keeping pace with Eleanor's smaller but equally spirited mare. It was during one of these rides, about a week after Adrian's arrival, that they found themselves at the ancient oak tree Eleanor had shown him during his first visit. The tree stood stark and beautiful against the white landscape, its bare branches reaching toward a pale winter sky. They dismounted, and their guards maintained a respectful distance that allowed for private conversation. "Eleanor," Adrian said, taking both her hands in his as they stood beneath the oak's sheltering branches, "we need to discuss practical matters, though I confess I would much rather simply exist in this perfect bubble we have created here." Eleanor smiled, squeezing his hands gently. "I know. We cannot hide at Wintermere forever, as much as I might wish we could. I need to return to court within the month," Adrian said, his expression troubled. "My father is beginning to ask questions about my prolonged absence, and there are matters that require my attention. But more importantly, I need to formally request his blessing for our marriage." Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. "Do you think he will object?" Adrian was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "My father is a practical man, and he will see the political advantages of a marriage that strengthens our ties to the Northern Territories. Your father is well respected, and Wintermere is strategically important. But he may have concerns about whether you are prepared for life at court, whether you understand the complexities and dangers of that world. And are you concerned about the same things?" Eleanor asked quietly. Adrian pulled her closer, his gray eyes intense as they searched her face. "I am concerned about bringing you into a world that can be cruel and unforgiving, where people will judge you and test you and look for any weakness they can exploit. I am concerned about whether I can protect you from the worst of it, while still allowing you to be the remarkable woman you are. But I am not concerned about your ability to handle it. You have more strength and intelligence than half the nobles at court combined." Eleanor leaned her head against Adrian's chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart through the layers of wool and leather. "I am frightened," she admitted. "I have spent my entire life at Wintermere. The thought of court, of being surrounded by strangers who may resent me or see me as unworthy of you, it terrifies me. But I am more frightened of losing you, of letting fear prevent me from claiming the life we could have together. You will never lose me," Adrian promised, his arms tightening around her. "Whatever challenges we face, we will face them together, and you will not be entirely among strangers. My mother, Queen Catherine, is a kind woman who I believe will welcome you warmly. She has long despaired of my ever finding someone I truly loved, and she will be pleased to see me happy." They stood like that for several minutes, drawing comfort and strength from each other's presence, before Adrian pulled back slightly and looked down at Eleanor with a mischievous smile. "There is something else we need to discuss. Our wedding. When would you like it to be?" Eleanor's heart skipped. "I had not thought that far ahead. What is customary for royal weddings?" "Customary would be a lengthy betrothal period, at least 6 months, to allow for proper planning and to give the kingdom time to prepare for the celebrations," Adrian said. "But I find I have very little patience for customary at the moment. Eleanor, I have already waited months to be with you. The thought of waiting 6 more is nearly unbearable." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, understanding the implications of his words. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting we marry as soon as it can be arranged. 2 months, perhaps 3 at the most. Long enough to satisfy the basic requirements of propriety and allow your father to prepare Wintermere for the ceremony, but not so long that I lose my mind with impatience." Eleanor laughed, the sound bright and free in the cold air. "You are very confident that your father will give his blessing." "I am confident that I will not take no for an answer," Adrian replied firmly. "I have served my kingdom faithfully for my entire adult life. I have led campaigns, negotiated treaties, and placed duty above personal desire in every circumstance. I am asking for this one thing, this one choice that is mine alone to make, and I will not be denied." The conviction in his voice sent a thrill through Eleanor. This was the warrior prince, the leader of men, the man who had never backed down from a challenge. And he was choosing to fight for her, for them, with the same determination he brought to every other battle. "Then I say yes," Eleanor said softly. 2 months, 3 at most. Let us not waste any more time than necessary." Adrian's response was to pull her close again, and for a long moment, they simply held each other. Two people who had found something rare and precious in each other and who were determined to protect it against whatever obstacles might arise. The ride back to Wintermere was filled with plans and dreams. They discussed where they would live, settling on the idea of splitting their time between court and the Northern Territories, ensuring that Eleanor would not be completely separated from her home and family. They talked about the wedding ceremony itself, Eleanor describing the Northern traditions she would like to incorporate, Adrian sharing some of the royal customs that would be expected. They spoke of the future they would build together, the children they hoped to have, the legacy they wanted to leave. But beneath the joy and excitement, both felt the weight of what was coming. Adrian would have to leave soon, would have to return to court alone and face his father with the news of his chosen bride. There would be scrutiny, questions, possibly opposition from nobles who had hoped to secure the prince's hand for their own daughters or political allies. And Eleanor would have to prepare herself for a life utterly different from anything she had known, for the challenges of becoming a princess and eventually, perhaps, a queen. That evening, after another celebratory feast, Lord Edmund called Eleanor, Adrian, and Margaret to his private study. He poured wine for each of them and raised his glass in a toast. To my daughter Eleanor, who has found the courage to claim her own happiness, and to Prince Adrian, who has proven himself worthy of her love. May your marriage be blessed with joy, strength, and enduring affection. They drank, and then Lord Edmund set down his glass and fixed Adrian with a serious look. Your Highness, I must speak plainly with you about certain realities. Eleanor is my eldest daughter, and I love her dearly. The thought of her entering the world of court politics, a world known for its cruelty and intrigue, fills me with concern. I understand your worries, my lord, Adrian replied. They mirror my own. Then let me be clear about what I expect. Lord Edmund continued. I expect you to protect my daughter, not just physically but emotionally and socially. I expect you to stand by her when others question her worthiness or her background. I expect you to value her counsel and respect her intelligence, not simply parade her as an ornament of your status. If you cannot promise me these things, then I will not give my blessing to this marriage, regardless of your rank or position. Eleanor opened her mouth to protest her father's bluntness, but Adrian held up a hand, his expression serious and respectful. Lord Edmund, you have every right to demand these assurances, and I give them freely. Eleanor is not simply the woman I love. She is the woman I respect and admire above all others. I have no interest in a wife who is merely decorative or compliant. I want a partner, someone who will challenge me, advise me, and help me be a better man and a better leader. That is what Eleanor offers, and I would be a fool to diminish or constrain such a gift. Lord Edmund studied the prince for a long moment before nodding slowly. Then you have my blessing and my trust. Do not make me regret giving either. You have my word, Adrian said solemnly. The conversation shifted to practical matters. Lord Edmund suggested that Adrian take Margaret back to court with him when he left, along with Eleanor. This would serve multiple purposes. Margaret would act as companion and support for Eleanor as she navigated her first experiences at court, and it would allow Eleanor to be formally presented to the king and queen before the wedding, demonstrating proper respect for royal protocol. It is a sound plan, Adrian agreed. The journey will take nearly 2 weeks in winter conditions, but I can ensure both ladies travel in comfort and safety. My men are experienced, and I will arrange for additional guards and servants to accompany us. Eleanor felt both excitement and trepidation at the thought of leaving Windermere, but she drew comfort from knowing that Margaret would be with her, and of course, Adrian would be by her side throughout the journey. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Eleanor worked with Anne to select clothing appropriate for court, a task complicated by the fact that northern fashions were somewhat different from southern styles. They compromised by creating new gowns that incorporated elements of both, hoping to present Eleanor as someone who honored her northern heritage while also respecting court conventions. Margaret was beside herself with excitement at the prospect of visiting the royal court. At 16, she had never traveled further than a few days' ride from Windermere, and the thought of seeing the capital city, meeting nobles from across the kingdom, and experiencing the grandeur of palace life filled her with barely contained enthusiasm. Adrian spent his days helping with preparations, while also conducting the legitimate territorial business he had claimed as his reason for being in the north. He met with other northern lords, strengthened trade agreements, and ensured that the region's concerns and needs would be properly represented at court. Eleanor was impressed by his dedication, watching how he balanced his personal desires with his responsibilities to the kingdom. On the eve of their departure, Eleanor walked the battlements of Windermere one last time, wanting to imprint every detail in her memory. The winter moon was full, casting silver light across the familiar landscape. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Adrian approaching, wrapped in a heavy cloak against the cold. "I thought I might find you here," he said, coming to stand beside her at the wall. "Are you having second thoughts?" Eleanor shook her head. "No, not second thoughts. But I am saying goodbye in a way. I know I will return to Wintermere, that this will always be my home in some sense, but I also know that I will be different when I come back. The Eleanor who has lived her entire life within these walls will cease to exist, replaced by someone new, someone I have not yet met." Adrian took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Change is not always loss, my love. Yes, you will be different, but you will also be more fully yourself, more able to exercise your gifts and capabilities in ways that Wintermere, for all its virtues, cannot provide. And I will be there with you through every step of that transformation." Eleanor leaned against him, grateful for his strength and reassurance. "Tell me honestly, what awaits us at court? I want to be prepared, want to know what challenges I will face." Adrian was quiet for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "The king, my father, is a fair man, but a strategic one. He will evaluate you based on what you can offer the kingdom, how you will reflect on the royal family, whether you possess the qualities necessary to be a princess, and potentially, someday, a queen. My mother, as I've said, will likely be warm and welcoming, but she is also shrewd and will observe you carefully." "And the other nobles?" Eleanor asked. "Some will be genuinely pleased, seeing our marriage as a wise strengthening of ties with the North. Others will be disappointed, having hoped to position their own daughters or relatives for such an advantageous match. There will be those who question whether a northern lord's daughter is suited to be a princess, who will look for any sign of inadequacy or impropriety. And there will be a few, inevitably, who will try to use you to get to me, who will offer false friendship while secretly working to undermine our position." Eleanor absorbed this sobering assessment. "How do I navigate such a world?" "You stay true to yourself while being wise about whom you trust," Adrian advised. "You observe before you speak. You listen more than you talk, at least initially. You are gracious to everyone but intimate with few. And you remember that you are not alone. I will be there to guide you, to protect you, to help you understand the currents beneath the surface of every interaction." "It sounds exhausting," Eleanor admitted. Adrian smiled wryly. "It can be, but it also has its rewards. There is satisfaction in outmaneuvering those who underestimate you, in building alliances that strengthen the kingdom, in using your position to make positive changes in people's lives. And Eleanor, I have seen you manage a complex household, negotiate with merchants and craftsmen, settle disputes and coordinate dozens of people and tasks simultaneously. The skills you have developed here will serve you well at court, even if the context is different." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the moon's path across the sky until the cold drove them back inside. Tomorrow they would begin the journey that would carry Eleanor away from everything she had known and toward a future she could barely imagine. But with Adrian by her side and Margaret to support her, she felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited. The morning of departure dawned clear and cold. The courtyard of Wintermere was filled with activity as horses were readied, supplies loaded onto wagons, and final preparations completed. Eleanor wore traveling clothes of deep green wool lined with fur, practical but elegant. Margaret, dressed similarly in blue, could barely contain her excitement. Lord Edmund embraced both his daughters, his eyes suspiciously bright as he held them close. "Remember who you are and where you come from," he told Eleanor. "Do not let anyone make you feel less than you are. You carry the strength of the North in your blood, and that is worth more than all the courtly polish in the kingdom." "I will remember, father," Eleanor promised, her own voice thick with emotion. To Adrian, Lord Edmund said simply, "Take care of them, both of them." "With my life," Adrian vowed. The company rode out through the gates of Wintermere as the sun climbed above the horizon, Eleanor looking back only once at the fortress that had been her entire world. Anne rode with them, along with 2 other servants from Wintermere who would help Eleanor and Margaret adjust to their new circumstances. Adrian's guard numbered 20 men, seasoned warriors who would ensure their safety on the long road south. The journey was arduous, the winter roads difficult, and the weather unpredictable. They traveled for 8 to 10 hours each day, stopping at inns or, when necessary, camping in the open. Adrian ensured that Eleanor and Margaret had the best accommodations available, and he rode beside Eleanor for much of each day, their conversations helping to pass the long hours. As they traveled south, the landscape gradually changed. The wild open moors of the north gave way to more cultivated lands, then to rolling hills dotted with villages and farms. The weather grew milder, the snow giving way to cold rain, and then to merely chilly but dry conditions. Eleanor watched it all with fascination, seeing for the first time how vast and varied the kingdom truly was. She had known it intellectually, of course, had studied maps and heard travelers' tales, but experiencing it directly was something else entirely. Each region had its own character, its own customs and accents and ways of life. On the 10th day of their journey, they crested a hill and saw in the distance the capital city, sprawling across both banks of a wide river and dominated by the massive stone palace that housed the royal family. Eleanor's breath caught at the sight. It was enormous, far larger than she had imagined, with towers and walls and buildings stretching as far as she could see. "That is to be your home," Adrian said softly, watching her reaction. "It is magnificent," Eleanor breathed, "and terrifying." Adrian reached over and squeezed her hand. "You will conquer it, my love, just as you have conquered my heart. I have no doubt of that." As they rode toward the city gates, Eleanor straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She was Eleanor Ashford, daughter of the North, betrothed to Prince Adrian, and she would face whatever awaited her with courage and grace. The girl who had watched the road from Wintermere's battlements was gone. In her place rode a woman ready to claim her future, whatever it might hold. The palace was even more overwhelming up close than it had appeared from a distance. Eleanor and Margaret rode through the massive gates, their eyes wide as they took in the grandeur surrounding them. The outer courtyard alone was larger than all of Wintermere's grounds, filled with guards in polished armor, servants hurrying about their duties, and nobles on horseback or in covered carriages. The stone walls rose several stories high, punctuated by tall windows and decorative battlements that spoke of wealth and power far beyond anything Eleanor had experienced. Adrian guided them through the maze of courtyards and passages, clearly at home in this complex environment. Servants and guards bowed as he passed, and Eleanor noticed the curious glances directed at her and Margaret. She kept her expression calm and pleasant, drawing on years of managing Wintermere to project confidence she did not entirely feel. They were taken to a wing of the palace reserved for noble guests and important visitors. The chambers assigned to Eleanor and Margaret were luxurious beyond anything they had known, with tapestries on the walls, thick carpets on the floors, and furnishings carved from dark wood and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Large windows overlooked a garden that, even in winter, showed signs of careful maintenance. "These rooms are beautiful," Margaret exclaimed, running her hand over the smooth surface of a writing desk. "Eleanor, look at this bed. It is twice the size of the one at home." Anne immediately began organizing their belongings while Eleanor moved to the window, looking out over the unfamiliar landscape. Adrian came to stand beside her, his presence a comfort amid all the strangeness. "I know this is overwhelming," he said quietly, "but I promise it will become familiar soon enough. Tomorrow, I will present you to my parents. My mother is eager to meet you, and my father has agreed to a private audience before any formal presentations are made." Eleanor turned to face him, her anxiety evident despite her attempts to hide it. "What should I say? How should I behave? Adrian, I do not want to embarrass you or fail to meet their expectations." Adrian took both her hands in his gray eyes warm and reassuring. "Be yourself, Eleanor. That is all I ask, and all they should expect. You are intelligent, gracious, and capable. Those qualities will be evident no matter what you say or do. My mother will see your genuine nature, and my father will recognize your strength and wisdom. And if they do not approve?" Eleanor asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her throughout the journey. "Then I will convince them," Adrian said firmly. "Eleanor, I have made my choice, and that choice is you. Nothing will change that. Not my father's concerns, not political considerations, not the opinions of the entire court. You are the woman I love, the woman I intend to marry, and I will not be moved from that position." His conviction bolstered Eleanor's courage. She squeezed his hands and managed a smile. "Then I will face them tomorrow with as much grace as I can manage, and trust that our love will be enough to overcome any obstacles." That evening, a servant arrived with an invitation for Eleanor and Margaret to dine privately with Prince Adrian in his chambers, a courtesy that would allow them to rest from their journey and avoid the scrutiny of a formal court dinner. Eleanor accepted gratefully, relieved to have one more evening before facing the full weight of court attention. Adrian's chambers were in a different wing of the palace, larger and more elaborately furnished than the guest quarters. A table had been set with fine dishes and wine, and a fire burned cheerfully in the hearth. For a few hours, the three of them were able to relax, sharing a meal and conversation that felt almost normal despite the grandeur of their surroundings. Margaret, her initial excitement tempered by exhaustion from the journey, retired early with Anne's assistance. This left Eleanor and Adrian alone for the first time since their arrival, chaperoned only by the presence of servants who maintained a discreet distance. "Are you truly all right?" Adrian asked, studying Eleanor's face in the firelight. "I can see the strain you are under even when you try to hide it." Eleanor sighed, letting some of her carefully maintained composure slip. "I am terrified," she admitted. "Everything here is so different from what I know. The palace alone is larger than some of the villages near Wintermere. The nobles I saw in the courtyards wore more wealth on their persons than my father's entire household possesses. How am I supposed to fit into this world, Adrian? How am I supposed to become one of them?" "You are not supposed to become one of them," Adrian said intensely. "Eleanor, that is precisely why I love you. You are different from the nobles who have spent their entire lives at court, consumed with intrigue and status and endless maneuvering for advantage. You have substance, genuine character formed by real responsibility and authentic relationships. Do not try to become what they are. Let them see what you are, and let that be enough." Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that her northern honesty and straightforward nature would be valued rather than scorned. But she had heard enough stories of court life to know that things were rarely so simple. The next morning, Eleanor dressed with particular care in a gown of deep blue wool embroidered with silver thread in patterns that echoed the northern style while incorporating more courtly elegance. Anne arranged her hair in an elaborate braided crown, and Eleanor wore the ruby ring Adrian had given her, along with the silver rose brooch. She wanted to look her best, to make a good first impression on the king and queen. Adrian arrived to escort her to the audience, and Eleanor's heart raced as they walked through the palace corridors. Servants and minor nobles bowed as they passed, and Eleanor felt the weight of countless curious eyes upon her. She kept her head high and her expression serene, channeling every lesson her father had taught her about dignity and bearing. The royal chambers were in the oldest part of the palace, a section that spoke of centuries of history and power. Guards stood at attention outside massive doors carved with the royal crest. At Adrian's approach, the doors swung open, revealing a chamber that managed to be both imposing and surprisingly intimate. King Edward sat in a chair near a large window, his presence commanding despite the informality of the setting. He was in his late 50s, with gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes, the same steel gray as Adrian's, were sharp and assessing as they fixed on Eleanor. Beside him stood Queen Catherine, a woman of graceful middle age with kind eyes and an air of quiet strength. Eleanor sank into a deep curtsy, holding the position until the king spoke. "Rise, Lady Eleanor," King Edward said, his voice deep and measured. "Welcome to our court." Eleanor stood, meeting the king's gaze with as much confidence as she could muster. "Your Majesty, I am honored by your welcome and grateful for this audience." Queen Catherine stepped forward, her expression warm. "My dear, we have heard much about you from Adrian. Come, sit with us. There is no need for such formality in a private meeting." They settled into chairs arranged near the fire, and servants poured wine before withdrawing to a respectful distance. King Edward studied Eleanor in silence for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily, refusing to look away or show weakness. "My son tells me you have captured his heart," the king said finally. "That is no small claim, given Adrian's generally practical nature. Tell me, Lady Eleanor, what is it about you that has inspired such devotion?" The question was direct and slightly challenging, clearly designed to test Eleanor's composure. She took a breath and answered honestly, "I cannot claim to know your Majesty's son's mind entirely, but I believe we found in each other something rare, genuine understanding and respect. We see each other as we truly are, not as our positions or duties define us. That kind of authentic connection is precious, and neither of us was willing to let it go despite the complications it created." "Complications indeed," King Edward said. "You come from the north, from a respected but relatively minor noble house. You have no experience with court life, no training in the political maneuvering that is the daily reality of existence here, Some would say you are ill-suited to be a princess. Eleanor felt Adrian tense beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm, silently asking him to let her respond. Some would say that, Your Majesty, and they would not be entirely wrong. I lack the polish and sophistication of ladies raised at court, but I would argue that I possess other qualities that may prove equally valuable. I have managed a complex household for 7 years. I understand duty and responsibility. I am capable of learning, adapting, and growing to meet new challenges. And I love your son with a depth and sincerity that no amount of political calculation could produce. King Edward's expression remained unreadable, but Queen Catherine smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. Well said, my dear, the Queen interjected. Edward, you cannot fault the girl for honesty, which is itself a rare quality at court. Honesty is admirable, the King acknowledged, but it must be tempered with wisdom about when and how to speak. The court is not a forgiving place, Lady Eleanor. Those who oppose this marriage, and there will be some, will look for any weakness to exploit. They will test you, challenge you, and wait for you to make mistakes they can use to undermine your position. Then I will endeavor not to make such mistakes, Your Majesty, Eleanor replied. And when I do err, as I inevitably will, I will acknowledge it, learn from it, and continue forward. I do not claim to be perfect, only committed to being worthy of the trust Prince Adrian has placed in me. King Edward leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Adrian, you may leave us for a moment. I would speak with Lady Eleanor privately. Adrian looked reluctant, but at a nod from his mother, he rose and bowed. As you wish, father. He squeezed Eleanor's hand briefly before leaving the chamber. Once Adrian had departed, King Edward's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming less formal and more paternal. Lady Eleanor, I am going to be frank with you. Adrian is my second son, but he is in many ways more suited to leadership than Richard, who will inherit the throne. Adrian is a warrior and a strategist, beloved by the soldiers he commands and respected by the nobles he serves alongside. His choice of bride matters, not just for his own happiness, but for the stability of the kingdom. Eleanor listened carefully, understanding that this was the true test. I have watched my son struggle with his position his entire life, the king continued. Second sons are difficult to place. They must be useful but not threatening, accomplished but not overshadowing. Adrian has walked that line with more grace than I could have hoped, and he has earned the right to some say in his own future. If he has chosen you, then I am inclined to trust his judgment. Your Majesty, Eleanor began, but the king held up a hand. Let me finish. I am inclined to trust his judgment, but I am also aware of the realities of court politics. There are nobles who have been angling to ally their families with the crown through marriage to Adrian. Some of them will be disappointed and potentially vindictive. There are those who will see a northern bride as evidence that Adrian is being pushed to the margins, given a suitable but not brilliant match. You will face challenges, Lady Eleanor, that will test not just your social skills, but your character and your resolve. I understand, Your Majesty, Eleanor said quietly. Do you? King Edward challenged. Do you truly understand what it means to have your every word analyzed, your every gesture interpreted, your every choice scrutinized for political meaning? Can you smile graciously at people who are actively working to undermine you? Can you navigate conversations where the true meaning is hidden beneath layers of courtly language? Eleanor met the king's eyes steadily. I cannot claim to be skilled at such things now, Your Majesty, but I am capable of learning, and I am willing to do whatever is necessary to support Prince Adrian and serve the kingdom. My father taught me that leadership often means doing difficult things with grace, and I have been practicing that lesson my entire life. The context may be different here, but the principle is the same. Queen Catherine spoke up, her tone gentle but firm. Edward, you are being rather hard on the girl. She has traveled for 2 weeks to be here, is far from everything familiar, and is facing the most important interview of her life. Perhaps we might give her the benefit of the doubt and some actual guidance rather than simply testing her resolve. King Edward's expression softened slightly. You are right, my dear, as usual. He turned back to Eleanor. Lady Eleanor, I am not opposed to this marriage. In fact, I think it may prove quite advantageous for Adrian and for the kingdom. But I needed to see for myself whether you possess the strength to handle what lies ahead. I believe you do. Relief flooded through Eleanor, though she was careful not to let it show too obviously. Thank you, Your Majesty. I will do everything in my power to prove your faith well placed. See that you do, the king said, but his tone was warmer now. Now, there are practical matters to discuss. Adrian wishes for a short betrothal, and I am inclined to allow it. 3 months should be sufficient for planning a wedding appropriate to the occasion while not being so rushed as to seem improper. The ceremony will be held here at the palace, and it will be a significant state occasion. Nobles from across the kingdom will attend, and you will be on display as never before. Can you handle that? I can, Your Majesty, Eleanor said, drawing on reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. Queen Catherine rose and came to sit beside Eleanor, taking the younger woman's hands in hers. My dear, I want you to know that you will have support. I will help you navigate court life, teach you what you need to know, and protect you where I can. Adrian loves you, and that is enough for me to love you as well. We will face whatever challenges arise together. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes at the Queen's kindness. Thank you, Your Majesty. That means more to me than I can express. Please, when we are in private, call me Catherine, the Queen said with a warm smile. We are to be family, after all. The audience concluded shortly thereafter, and Eleanor was escorted back to her chambers where Adrian waited anxiously. As soon as the doors closed behind them, he pulled her into his arms. Tell me everything, he demanded. Did my father approve? Was he terribly difficult? Are you all right? Eleanor laughed, the sound slightly shaky with relief and residual tension. Yes, he approved. Yes, he was rather difficult, and yes, I am all right. More than all right, actually. Adrian, we have 3 months. 3 months until we can be married. Adrian's face broke into a brilliant smile, and he spun Eleanor around, her feet leaving the ground. 3 months. Eleanor, do you know what this means? In 3 months, you will be my wife. We will finally be able to build the life we have dreamed of, to be together without separation or obstacles. He set her down gently, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms, the reality of their approaching wedding finally settling over them. 3 months seemed both impossibly long and frighteningly short, long enough to properly prepare, but short enough that every day would be filled with activity and anticipation. The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Queen Catherine took Eleanor under her wing, introducing her to the complexities of court life. Eleanor attended formal dinners and learned to navigate the elaborate etiquette that governed every interaction. She sat in on council meetings where petitions were heard and disputes settled, learning how justice was administered and power wielded. She met dozens of nobles, learning to read the subtle signals that indicated true friendship versus polite hostility. Margaret thrived in the court environment, her natural charm and enthusiasm making her popular among the younger nobles. She provided Eleanor with much-needed companionship and support, often making her sister laugh when the weight of her new responsibilities threatened to overwhelm her. Adrian remained by Eleanor's side as much as his own duties allowed. He introduced her to his closest friends and allies, men who had fought beside him and whom he trusted implicitly. He walked with her through the palace gardens, pointing out political alliances and warning her about nobles who might prove problematic. He shared meals with her whenever possible, these private moments becoming precious oases of normalcy amid the chaos of preparation. As the wedding day approached, Eleanor's confidence grew. She made mistakes, certainly, using the wrong form of address here, failing to catch a political subtext there, but she learned from each error and gradually became more comfortable in her new environment. The nobles who had initially been skeptical began to reassess their opinions as they saw her intelligence, her genuine interest in understanding the kingdom's challenges, and her unwavering devotion to Adrian. One evening, about a month before the wedding, Eleanor stood on a balcony overlooking the city, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Adrian found her there, as he so often did, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on top of her head. "I am thinking about how much has changed," Eleanor replied, leaning back against his solid strength. "A year ago, I was at Wintermere, managing my father's household, never imagining that my life could be anything other than what it had always been. Now I am here, in the capital, betrothed to a prince, about to become part of the royal family. It feels like a dream sometimes, like I might wake up and find that none of this is real." "It is very real," Adrian assured her, "and in a month it will be even more real. Eleanor, are you happy? Truly happy? I know the adjustment has been difficult, and I worry that I have pulled you into a life you never wanted." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him, her hands coming up to frame his face. "Adrian, I am happier than I ever thought possible. Yes, this life is challenging. Yes, there are moments when I feel overwhelmed or out of my depth. But I am with you, and that makes every challenge worthwhile. You are my home now, more than any place could ever be." Adrian kissed her then, a gentle but passionate expression of all the love and gratitude he felt. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "1 month," Adrian said. "1 month until I can call you my wife, until we can truly begin our life together. I can hardly wait." "Neither can I," Eleanor whispered. "Neither can I." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, spring sunshine streaming through the tall windows of Eleanor's chambers. She had barely slept, her mind too full of anticipation and nerves to allow for rest. Anne and several palace servants moved about the room, preparing everything needed for the ceremony that would begin in just a few hours. Margaret sat beside Eleanor, holding her sister's hand as they watched the activity around them. "How are you feeling?" Margaret asked softly. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies dancing in her stomach. Excited, terrified, grateful, overwhelmed, all of it at once. She squeezed Margaret's hand. "Thank you for being here with me. I could not have survived these past months without you." "I would not have missed this for anything," Margaret replied, her eyes bright with emotion. "My sister, marrying a prince. It is like something from a story, except it is real, and I get to witness it." Queen Catherine entered the chambers, her presence immediately commanding attention, despite the gentleness of her manner. She had become a true friend and mentor to Eleanor over the past months, and Eleanor had grown to love her deeply. "Eleanor, my dear, how are you this morning?" Catherine asked, moving to sit on Eleanor's other side. "I am ready," Eleanor said, and she realized as she spoke that it was true. The nervousness was still there, but beneath it lay certainty and joy. "I am ready to marry Adrian, to begin our life together, to embrace whatever comes next." Catherine smiled warmly. "That is exactly what I hope to hear. Now, we must begin preparing you. This wedding is a state occasion, and you must look every inch the princess you are about to become." The process of dressing Eleanor took nearly 2 hours. Her gown was a masterpiece, created by the finest seamstresses in the kingdom. The base was white silk, so fine it seemed to shimmer in the light. Over this went an overdress of deep crimson velvet, the color of the royal house, embroidered with gold thread in intricate patterns of roses and vines that incorporated both northern and southern design elements. The sleeves were long and fitted, ending in points at her wrists, lined with white ermine fur. The neckline was modest but elegant, trimmed with more ermine and set with small rubies that caught the light. Eleanor's hair had been washed with scented oils the night before, and now Anne arranged it in an elaborate style that took account of the crown Eleanor would wear. Long chestnut waves fell down her back, partially braided with ribbons of gold and crimson woven through the plaits. The front was pulled back from her face in a style that would support the weight of the crown while still framing her features beautifully. When Eleanor was finally dressed and her hair complete, Anne stepped back with tears in her eyes. "My lady, you look like a queen." Eleanor moved to stand before the large mirror that had been brought to her chambers for this purpose. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her. The gown transformed her, making her look regal and elegant, yet somehow she still saw herself in the reflection, the girl from Wintermere who had dared to dream of something more. Margaret brought over the final piece, the crown that Eleanor would wear. It was not the full royal crown, which would come only if she ever became queen, but a circlet designed specifically for this day. White gold set with rubies and diamonds, delicate yet substantial, beautiful yet powerful. Catherine helped position it on Eleanor's head, adjusting it carefully until it sat perfectly. "Perfect," Catherine pronounced. "Adrian will not be able to take his eyes off you." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Lord Edmund, who had traveled from Wintermere a week earlier for the wedding. He entered the chambers and stopped short at the sight of his daughter, his eyes filling with tears that he did not bother to hide. "Eleanor," he breathed, "my little girl, you are so beautiful." Eleanor crossed to her father and embraced him carefully, mindful of her elaborate gown. "Father, thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting me, for letting me choose this path." Lord Edmund held his daughter close, I would move heaven and earth to see you this happy. You deserve this joy, this love. Your mother would be so proud of you." The mention of her mother brought tears to Eleanor's own eyes, but she blinked them back, not wanting to ruin the careful work Anne had done on her appearance. "I wish she could be here." "She is here," Lord Edmund assured her. "I feel her presence, and I know she is watching over you with love and pride." The ceremony was to take place in the palace's great cathedral, a massive structure that could accommodate hundreds of guests. As Eleanor made her way through the palace corridors, preceded by Margaret and 6 other young noble ladies who would serve as her attendants, she could hear the murmur of the assembled crowd growing louder. At the cathedral doors, Lord Edmund offered his arm. "Ready, my daughter." Eleanor took a final deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The doors swung open, and the cathedral was revealed in all its glory. Every seat was filled with nobles from across the kingdom, all dressed in their finest. All turned to watch as Eleanor began her processional down the long aisle. Candles blazed from countless sconces, and spring flowers decorated every surface, filling the air with their sweet scent. But Eleanor barely noticed any of it. Her eyes were fixed on the figure waiting for her at the altar. Adrian stood tall and magnificent in formal court dress, a tunic of midnight blue over a shirt of white silk, with a cloak of crimson velvet trimmed with ermine falling from his shoulders. His dark hair had been carefully styled, and he wore a circlet similar to Eleanor's, marking his royal status. But it was his expression that captured Eleanor's attention, the look of absolute love and devotion in his gray eyes as he watched her approach. The walk down the aisle seemed to take forever and no time at all. Finally, Eleanor reached the altar, and Lord Edmund placed her hand in Adrian's before stepping back to join Margaret and the other family members in the front row. Adrian squeezed Eleanor's hand gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture of reassurance and affection. "You are breathtaking," he whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "As are you," Eleanor whispered back, unable to suppress her smile. The Archbishop of the realm, resplendent in ceremonial robes, began the ceremony. His voice rang out through the cathedral, speaking of love and duty, of partnership and commitment, of the sacred bond of marriage. Eleanor heard the words, understood their significance, but her full attention was on Adrian, on the man she was about to pledge her life to. When it came time for the vows, Adrian turned to face Eleanor fully, taking both her hands in his. His voice was clear and strong as he spoke. "I, Adrian, second prince of this realm, take you, Eleanor Ashford, to be my wife and princess. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through all the joys and challenges that life may bring. I promise to value your counsel, respect your strength, and cherish the gift of your love. Before all these witnesses, and in the sight of the divine, I pledge myself to you, now and forever." Eleanor's voice was equally steady as she spoke her own vows, though tears of joy streamed down her face. "I, Eleanor Ashford, take you, Adrian, to be my husband and prince. I promise to love you, support you, and walk beside you through whatever the future holds. I promise to be your partner in all things, to offer you my honest counsel, and to love you with all that I am. Before all these witnesses and in the sight of the divine, I pledge myself to you, now and forever." The Archbishop blessed their union, and then came the moment Eleanor had been waiting for. Adrian lifted her veil, his hands gentle as they framed her face, and kissed her. It was a kiss that spoke of promises kept and dreams realized, of months of separation finally ended, of a love that had survived every obstacle placed in its path. The cathedral erupted in applause and cheers, but Eleanor and Adrian were lost in their own world, holding each other close, finally, irrevocably bound together. The celebration that followed was magnificent. A feast had been prepared that would last well into the night, with entertainment provided by musicians, dancers, and performers from across the kingdom. Eleanor and Adrian sat at the high table, receiving congratulations from a seemingly endless stream of nobles and dignitaries. King Edward raised a toast to the newly married couple. "To my son, Adrian, and his bride, Princess Eleanor. May their marriage be blessed with love, strength, and many years of happiness. May they serve the kingdom well and build a legacy worthy of our royal house." "To Adrian and Eleanor," the assembled guests chorused, raising their glasses high. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself relaxing into the joy of the occasion. She danced with Adrian, their movements perfectly synchronized, as though they had been dancing together their entire lives. She accepted congratulations from nobles who had initially been skeptical, but who now seemed genuine in their well-wishes. She laughed with Margaret and spoke with her father, who beamed with pride at seeing his daughter so happy. Late in the evening, as the celebration showed no signs of slowing, Adrian leaned close to Eleanor and whispered, "Would it be terribly improper if we slipped away from our own wedding feast?" Eleanor smiled, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Probably, but I find I do not particularly care." Hand in hand, they made their quiet exit from the great hall, leaving the guests to continue celebrating without them. Adrian led Eleanor through the palace corridors to the chambers that had been prepared for them, rooms that would be their private sanctuary within the larger palace. Once inside, with the door closed behind them, Adrian pulled Eleanor into his arms, holding her close as though he could not quite believe she was real. "My wife," he said softly, wonder evident in his voice. "Eleanor, you are my wife, and you are my husband," Eleanor replied, joy flooding through her at the words. "After everything we have been through, all the obstacles we faced, we are finally here, together, as we were always meant to be." They stood like that for a long moment, simply holding each other, savoring the profound rightness of being together. Then Adrian pulled back slightly, his expression growing serious. "Eleanor, I want you to know something. These past months, watching you navigate court life, seeing how you have grown and adapted, while still remaining true to yourself, I have fallen in love with you all over again. You are remarkable, and I am the luckiest man in the kingdom to call you my wife." Eleanor felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. "Adrian, you saved me, not just from a life of duty without joy, but from the part of myself that was too afraid to reach for what I truly wanted. You taught me that love is worth fighting for, that dreams are worth pursuing even when they seem impossible. You gave me the courage to become who I was always meant to be." "We saved each other," Adrian corrected gently. "You gave my life meaning and purpose beyond mere duty. You showed me that it is possible to serve the kingdom while still claiming personal happiness. Together we are stronger than we could ever be apart." They kissed then, a kiss that held all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling, their happiness so profound it seemed to fill the very air around them. The months that followed their wedding were among the happiest Eleanor had ever known. She and Adrian settled into married life with an ease that surprised those who had predicted difficulties. They worked together on various kingdom initiatives, Eleanor's practical experience from managing Wintermere proving invaluable in addressing issues faced by common people throughout the realm. She became known as a princess who truly cared about her subjects, who listened to their concerns and worked tirelessly to improve their lives. Adrian continued his military and diplomatic duties, but now he did so with Eleanor by his side whenever possible. She traveled with him to various regions, learning about the kingdom's diversity and complexity, building relationships with local lords and common people alike. Her northern heritage, which some had initially seen as a liability, became an asset as she helped bridge the gap between the different regions of the realm. Margaret remained at court as well, eventually catching the eye of a young lord who was worthy of her charm and intelligence. Lord Edmund visited regularly, proud to see both his daughters thriving in their new lives. A year after their wedding, Eleanor discovered she was expecting a child. The news brought immeasurable joy to both her and Adrian, and to the entire royal family. King Edward was delighted at the prospect of another grandchild, and Queen Catherine fussed over Eleanor with maternal concern. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, she and Adrian spent many evenings planning for their growing family. They spoke of the values they wanted to instill in their children, the kind of world they hoped to build for the next generation, the legacy they wanted to leave. One evening, as they sat together in their chambers, Eleanor resting against Adrian's chest as he gently rubbed her swollen belly, Adrian spoke thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about that first autumn when we met? About how close we came to losing each other?" Eleanor smiled, remembering. "I think about it often. How a few different choices, a few different circumstances, and we might never have found our way to this moment. I made you a promise that day I left Wintermere," Adrian said quietly. "I promised I would return to you. It took longer than either of us hoped. And the path was more difficult than we could have imagined. But I kept that promise. You did, Eleanor confirmed. And I kept my promise to wait for you, even when waiting seemed impossible. Their child, a daughter, was born on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 2 years after Adrian's first visit to Windermere. They named her Catherine Eleanor, honoring both her grandmother and her mother. The baby had Adrian's dark hair and Eleanor's hazel eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she was surrounded by love. As Eleanor held her daughter for the first time, with Adrian beside her and their extended family gathered around, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the sheltered world of Windermere to the complexities of court life, from the heartbreak of separation to the joy of reunion, from the uncertainty of their early courtship to the solid foundation of their marriage. Every step had been necessary. Every challenge had made them stronger. Years passed, bringing more children, 2 sons who inherited their father's strength and their mother's wisdom. Eleanor and Adrian raised their family with love and intention, ensuring that their children understood both the privileges and responsibilities of their position. They continued to serve the kingdom together, implementing reforms that improved the lives of common people, strengthening alliances, and working tirelessly for peace and prosperity. Eleanor never forgot her roots in the north. She and Adrian made regular visits to Windermere, ensuring that their children knew their heritage and understood the importance of all the kingdom's regions. Lord Edmund lived to see his grandchildren grow, proud of the woman his daughter had become and the family she had built. When King Edward eventually passed, it was Crown Prince Richard who ascended to the throne, as was always intended. But Richard proved to be a weak ruler, and within a few years, it became clear that the kingdom needed stronger leadership. The nobles, remembering Adrian's military successes and diplomatic skills, and seeing the respect and love the common people had for both Adrian and Eleanor, petitioned for a change in succession. After much discussion and negotiation, Richard agreed to step aside in favor of his younger brother, recognizing that the kingdom's needs were more important than his own pride. Adrian became king and Eleanor became queen, positions they had never sought but which they accepted with grace and dedication. As queen, Eleanor proved to be everything the kingdom needed. She was wise, compassionate, and strong, beloved by nobles and commoners alike. She and Adrian ruled together as true partners, their love and mutual respect evident in every decision they made, every policy they implemented. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Adrian and Eleanor stood together on a balcony overlooking the capital city, watching the celebrations that the people had organized to honor their beloved king and queen. The city was ablaze with lights and music, filled with people genuinely happy to honor the couple who had served them so well. "Do you have any regrets?" Adrian asked, pulling Eleanor close against his side. Eleanor thought about the question seriously before answering. "Not a single one. Every challenge we faced, every obstacle we overcame, it all brought us here, to this moment, to this life we have built together. I would not change a thing." Adrian kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you from that first autumn evening, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Eleanor replied, turning in his arms to look up at the man who had been her prince, her husband, her partner, and now her king. "You promised you would return to me all those years ago, and you kept that promise. You have kept every promise you ever made to me, as you have kept yours to me," Adrian said softly. "You promised to wait, and you did. You promised to love me, and you have, through everything." They stood together as the celebrations continued below, 2 people who had found in each other something rare and precious, a love that had survived separation, overcome obstacles, and grown stronger with each passing year. The girl from Windermere who had once watched the road, hoping against hope that the prince would return, had become a queen beloved by her people. The prince who had promised to come back had not only kept that promise, but had built a life and a legacy with the woman he loved. Their story became legend, told and retold throughout the kingdom for generations. It was a tale of love and patience, of promises kept and faith rewarded, of 2 people who had refused to let circumstances dictate their future. Young lovers would hear their story and take hope that true love could overcome any obstacle. Children would grow up knowing that sometimes, against all odds, the prince does return, and the waiting is not in vain. But for Adrian and Eleanor, their story was simply their life, the journey they had walked together, the love they had nurtured through years of joy and challenge. As they grew old together, their love only deepened, each year adding new layers of understanding, respect, and affection. On quiet evenings, when the demands of ruling were set aside and they could simply be Adrian and Eleanor rather than king and queen, they would sit together by the fire and remember. They remembered that first autumn, the electric connection they had felt, the bittersweet parting and the long months of waiting. They remembered the moment of reunion, the joy of their wedding, the building of their family and their life together. And always, always, they were grateful. Grateful for the love they had found, for the courage to fight for it, for the patience to wait when waiting seemed impossible, and for the joy of spending their lives together, ruling their kingdom with wisdom and compassion, leaving a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The promise made on an autumn evening at Windermere had been kept, and in keeping it, two people had found not just love, but a lifetime of purpose, joy, and fulfillment. The prince had returned, and together they had built something far more precious than either had ever imagined possible. Their love story, forged in separation and strengthened by reunion, became the foundation not just of their personal happiness, but of a reign that brought peace, prosperity, and hope to an entire kingdom. And so they lived, and so they loved, and so their story passed into legend, a testament to the power of true love, the importance of keeping promises, and the rewards that come to those who are brave enough to wait for what truly matters, and wise enough to recognize it when it finally arrives.